My name is Charmaine. I am 35 years old and somehow still healing from wounds my family inflicted. As a successful software developer, I escaped their toxicity but maintained occasional contact. Last Sunday, they invited me to an upscale brunch to catch up. Between mimosas and avocado toast, my mother leaned forward smirking. You know, Charmaine, you are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way. I simply sipped my coffee and smiled. That night, I logged in, disabled every family credit account, and emailed my lawyer about selling the cabin. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to family who underestimated your worth. Growing up in Fairfield. Growing up, Connecticut meant privilege to outsiders, but inside our sprawling colonial home, emotional coldness permeated every corner. Our four-bedroom house with its manicured lawn and heated swimming pool was a fortress of expectations I could never quite meet. My childhood bedroom, painted pale blue at my mother Elaine's insistence, despite my preference for green, became my sanctuary in prison, from elementary school through high school. I maintained straight as joined honor societies and quietly plotted my escape. That suffocating environment taught me a valuable lesson about the illusion of wealth. People who boast about their status are usually the ones hiding the biggest insecurities. When I finally left home, I poured all my energy into coding and building my own software development firm. Over the years, I expanded into venture capital, specifically targeting distressed commercial real estate. Today, my businesses generate over $90,000 a month. My net worth is well into the 8 figures, but you would never know it by looking at me. I deliberately chose a life of stealth wealth. I drive a reliable 12-year-old Honda Civic. I wear unbranded cotton sundresses from regular department stores. I live in an unassuming townhouse, though I secretly own the entire block. I wanted to be certain that the people in my life valued me for my character, not my bank account. And for a long time, I thought my fiancé Elijah was exactly that kind of person. Elijah is 33, a mid-level sales director with a charming smile and a closet full of designer suits. When we met at a local coffee shop, he seemed grounded. He told me he admired my simplicity and my strong work ethic. But as our relationship progressed, cracks began to show. He became increasingly obsessed with appearances, constantly talking about his mother Vivian and her prominent standing in the elite circles of Buckhead, an upscale neighborhood in Atlanta. He would brag about their sprawling family estate, their country club memberships, and their legacy. I listened patiently, playing the role of the naive, modest girlfriend who worked a basic administrative job in tech. I never corrected him. I wanted to see exactly who he and his family truly were before I signed any marriage license. The true test began on a humid Saturday afternoon. Elijah finally invited me to his family estate for a lavish introductory dinner. I parked my old Honda at the end of a massive circular driveway filled with luxury cars. I stepped out wearing a simple yellow sundress I bought on sale at Target, holding a modest bottle of wine. As I walked up the grand stone steps, I noticed small details that told a different story than Elijah's bragging. The paint on the majestic columns was peeling. The landscaping was slightly overgrown. It reeked of old money that had quietly dried up. Before I could even reach the heavy oak front door, it swung open. Standing there was Dominique, Elijah's 29-year-old sister. She was draped in expensive silk loungewear, holding a crystal glass of champagne. She looked me up and down, her eyes lingering on my scuffed flats and my unbranded handbag. Her lip curled into a sneer of pure disdain. "Oh good, the extra help is finally here," Dominique said loudly, not even bothering to say hello. She reached out, snatched the bottle of wine from my hand without a word of thanks, and shoved a stained white catering apron hard into my chest. "You are late. The private chef has been overwhelmed all morning. Put this on and take the trays of raw oysters out to the patio. The guests are getting impatient." I stood there on the porch holding the dirty apron. I waited for Elijah, who had walked up right behind his sister, to intervene. I waited for him to wrap his arm around my waist, laugh at the misunderstanding, and proudly introduce me as his future wife. Instead, Elijah stood there, gripping a glass of bourbon, his face flushing a deep shade of red. He looked at Dominique, then looked at me, and his eyes darted away in embarrassment. Go on. Elijah muttered under his breath, leaning in close so only I could hear. Just play along for now, Charmaine. Do not make a scene on your first day here. My mother is very particular about first impressions, and she is already stressed about this party. Just help out a little bit, and I will formally introduce you when everyone sits down. I stared at the man I was supposed to marry. In that single moment, the facade completely shattered. He was not protecting me. He was protecting his family's fragile ego. He was ashamed of me, or rather ashamed of the poor version of me I had presented to him. A weak woman would have cried. An impulsive woman would have thrown the apron in his face and driven away. But I am a software developer. I build systems, find bugs, and exploit weaknesses. I smiled brightly, the kind of obedient, naive smile they expected from someone beneath them. Of course, I said softly. I would be happy to help out. I tied the apron and walked into the grand foyer. The house was decorated with gaudy chandeliers, but I spotted signs of financial distress everywhere. Past due notices from collection agencies were carelessly tossed on the entryway console table. There was a distinct lack of staff for a house this size. I navigated to the massive kitchen where a single flustered private chef was desperately plating appetizers. I did not complain. I washed my hands, grabbed a silver tray, and began arranging the oysters just as Dominique had commanded. It gave me the perfect cover. The invisible help is the best fly on the wall. No one pays attention to the person carrying the food. I carried the heavy silver tray out to the sunlit patio, weaving through small groups of people dressed in their finest weekend country club attire. As I approached the outdoor bar, I spotted Trey Dominique's husband. He wore a loud pink blazer and a thick gold watch that caught the sunlight. Elijah had described Trey as a massive player in the real estate and crypto markets, a self-made millionaire who was supposedly the financial anchor of the family. Trey was leaning against the marble bar counter, speaking loudly into his phone, clearly making sure everyone around him could hear his business dealings. Yeah, man. It is a done deal, Trey boasted, swirling his expensive scotch. The downtown commercial plaza on Peachtree, multi-million-dollar acquisition. I hold the exclusive deed. I am telling you, the zoning permits are already cleared. We are going to flip the entire block into luxury condos. If you want in on the ground floor, you need to wire me the $500,000 by Monday morning. Do not miss this train, bro. I stopped dead in my tracks, the heavy silver tray perfectly balanced on my fingertips. My heart gave a sudden sharp jolt, not from fear but from a deep, chilling amusement. I knew the exact commercial plaza on Peachtree he was talking about. I knew its exact square footage, its zoning restrictions, and its long history of financial mismanagement. I knew all of this because my venture capital firm had been quietly negotiating to buy that distressed property for the last 6 months. And as of 9 o'clock this very morning, the final wire transfer had cleared. The deed was legally signed, sealed, and locked away in my corporate attorney's vault. I was the sole owner of the Peachtree Plaza. Yet here was Trey, loud and confident, standing in his mother-in-law's backyard, using my property to run an illegal investment scam on his wealthy friends. I adjusted my grip on the tray of oysters and stepped closer to the bar, my face a mask of polite servitude. Would anyone care for an oyster? I asked softly, extending the tray toward Trey and his group of wealthy, gullible friends. Trey barely glanced at me. He waved his hand dismissively, nearly knocking the tray over. Just set them on the table and go make sure my glass is refilled, he ordered, turning right back to his captive audience to spin more lies about my building. I placed the silver tray down with perfect composure. I did not need to confront him then. I already had his name, his face, and a recording of his fraudulent claims playing on a loop in my memory. The trap was set. All I had to do was let him walk into it. A few moments later, Vivian clapped her hands from the grand terrace. "Dinner is served," she announced, her voice echoing across the manicured lawn. The guests began filtering into the formal dining room. I took off the stained apron, folded it neatly over a chair, and joined the procession. The dining room was a masterclass in aggressive intimidation. A massive mahogany table stretched across the room, set with heavy crystal goblets and antique silver that badly needed polishing. Vivian took her seat at the head of the table like a queen ascending her throne. Elijah sat to her right, and Dominique and Trey took the seats opposite him. I was directed to sit at the far end, completely isolated right next to the swinging kitchen door. It was the seat traditionally reserved for the nanny or the lowest-ranking member of a household. I sat down gracefully, unfazed by the obvious slight. Almost immediately, the interrogation began. Vivian did not even wait for the first course to be served before she fixed her sharp, calculating gaze on me. "So," Charmaine, Vivian drawled, picking up her wineglass but not drinking from it. "Elijah tells me you work in administration. How quaint. Tell me, do you just answer phones all day, or do they actually let you schedule the meetings too?" The entire table went quiet. Dominique smirked behind her napkin. I looked directly at Vivian, keeping my expression entirely neutral. "I handle operations and system management." "Mrs. Sterling," I replied calmly. "It keeps me quite busy." Vivian sighed theatrically, exchanging a knowing look with Dominique. "Well, honest work is nothing to be ashamed of, even if it lacks prestige. It is just quite an adjustment for us. We are a family of legacy Charmaine. We value pedigree." Elijah was previously engaged to Camille. "You know of Camille, do you not? Her father is the chief of surgery at Emory Hospital. Her mother sits on the board of the ballet with me. They have a magnificent winter estate in Aspen." I glanced at Elijah. He was staring intently at his water glass, his jaw tight. He did not say a word to defend me. He did not tell his mother that I was brilliant or kind or that he loved me. He just let her systematically tear me down. "Camille had such exquisite taste," Dominique chimed in, leaning across the table. "She wore a custom Vera Wang gown to my engagement party. It cost more than most people make in a year." "Where did you say your dress is from, Charmaine? It looks very practical, like something you could wear to a picnic or to clean a house." Trey let out a loud, obnoxious laugh. "Play nice, babe. Maybe she got a 2-for-1 deal." I smiled gently. I believe comfort is just as important as the label. Vivian scoffed, dismissing my answer entirely. The private chef emerged from the kitchen, flanked by 2 servers. They began placing plates of extravagant food in front of us. There was truffle-infused wild mushroom risotto, pan-seared wagyu beef, and butter-poached lobster tail. It was an incredibly heavy, unnecessarily expensive menu, designed specifically to showcase wealth throughout the meal. Vivian and Dominique loudly complained about the food. The risotto was slightly under-seasoned, the beef was a fraction too rare, the wine was not decanted long enough. They treated the exhausted chef with absolute contempt, displaying the kind of cruel arrogance that only belongs to people who are secretly terrified of losing their status. I ate quietly, analyzing every interaction. I noticed how Trey aggressively monopolized the conversation, talking over Elijah to boast about his crypto portfolios and his real estate conquests. I noticed how Elijah shrank in Trey's presence, desperate for his brother-in-law's validation. And most importantly, I noticed the panicked look in Vivian's eyes when a phone alarm went off in her purse, reminding her of a scheduled payment she clearly could not make. This family was a house of cards, held together by nothing but lies and least luxury. As the dessert plates were cleared away, the atmosphere shifted. The head chef approached Vivian carrying a black leather presentation folder. He bowed his head slightly. "The final invoice for today's private catering service and the imported ingredients, madame." Vivian did not even glance at the total. A slow, venomous smile spread across her face. She placed her manicured hand flat on the leather folder and pushed it hard across the long mahogany table. It slid smoothly over the polished wood and stopped right next to my water glass. I looked down at the folder, then up at Vivian. "In our family," Vivian announced, her voice ringing out clearly so that every single guest in the room would hear, "the newcomer proves their worth by treating the first dinner. Consider it an initiation fee to sit at my table. Let us hope your little debit card does not decline, Charmaine." A heavy silence fell over the room. Dominique covered her mouth to hide a cruel giggle. Trey leaned back in his chair, folding his arms, waiting for the show. They expected me to panic. They expected me to open the folder, see an impossible number, and burst into tears. They wanted to see me humiliated, to watch me beg Elijah for help, proving once and for all that I was a broke gold digger who did not belong in their elite world. Elijah leaned over, his face flushed with embarrassment. His voice dropped to an urgent, panicked whisper. Charmaine, just put it on a credit card. I will pay you back half later, I swear. Just do not embarrass me in front of my mother right now. Please. I looked at the man I had considered marrying. He was more concerned about his mother's approval than my dignity. He was perfectly willing to let me be publicly degraded just to keep the peace. I reached out and casually flipped open the leather folder. The bill was printed on thick parchment paper. $1,800 for a single meal. For a woman working a basic administrative job, dropping almost $2,000 on a Sunday dinner would be devastating. It would mean missing rent, skipping car payments, spiraling into debt. For me, it was less than the interest my investment accounts generated while I was eating my appetizer. I did not gasp. I did not flinch. I calmly reached into my inexpensive handbag and pulled out my wallet. I extracted a plain standard-issue blue debit card. There was no gold trim, no heavy metal finish, no sign of wealth whatsoever. It looked exactly like the card of a woman living paycheck to paycheck. I handed it up to the chef with a warm smile. Please add a 20% gratuity for your team. The food was lovely despite what others may think. The chef looked surprised by my kindness. Thank you, miss. I will run this right away. He pulled a mobile card reader from his apron. The entire table held its collective breath. Vivian leaned forward, her eyes narrowing, waiting for the inevitable red light and the declined sound. She was already preparing her speech about how I was a fraud who had wasted their time. Trey was smirking. Dominique was already looking away in disgust. The chef inserted the chip. The machine processed for 3 seconds. Then it beeped. A bright, cheerful green light flashed on the screen. Approved. The chef printed the receipt and handed my card back to me. Thank you again, miss. Have a wonderful evening. I slipped the card back into my wallet and took a calm sip of my water. The silence in the room was deafening. Vivian stared at the card reader as if it had just insulted her. Her jaw was tight, the muscles in her neck straining. She had orchestrated this entire elaborate trap to crush me, to expose me as a penniless imposter, and I had swiped the card with the indifference of someone buying a cup of coffee. The humiliation she had planned for me was instantly redirected back onto her. She looked confused, angry, and deeply unsettled. Trey shifted uncomfortably in his seat. Dominique scowled and aggressively crossed her arms. Elijah let out a massive sigh of relief, clearly thinking the worst was over. He reached under the table and patted my knee, whispering, "Good job." But Vivian was not finished. Her eyes burned with a dark, resentful fury. She was not a woman who accepted defeat gracefully. If financial humiliation was not going to work, she was going to escalate to legal subjugation. She shot a sharp, commanding glare at Elijah across the table. It was a silent order, one they had clearly rehearsed beforehand. Elijah instantly sat up straight. He cleared his throat loudly, the sound cutting through the tense atmosphere in the dining room. He reached down to the heavy leather briefcase he had brought with him and placed it on the table. The brass locks clicked loudly as he opened it. Charmaine, Elijah said, his voice completely void of any warmth or affection. Since we are officially combining our lives soon, my mother and I had our legal team draft something up. It is just a standard precaution. He reached into the briefcase and pulled out a thick, terrifyingly dense stack of legal documents, dropping them right onto the table in front of me. The thud of the thick stack of paper seemed to echo in the silent dining room. I stared at the bold, capitalized letters on the first page. Premarital agreement. It was not just a few sheets of paper. It looked like a small novel bound with a heavy black clip. I slowly looked up from the document to Elijah. His face was entirely devoid of the affection he usually faked so well. He looked like a junior associate trying to close a hostile corporate merger. Go ahead and read it, Vivian said, leaning back in her chair with a satisfied smirk. Or just flip to the back and sign it. Our lawyers assure me it is entirely standard for families of our caliber. I reached out and picked up the heavy document. I did not flip to the back. I started reading the clauses, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon with the speed and precision of someone who dealt with complex corporate contracts every single day. The deeper I read, the more I had to suppress a genuine laugh. Calling it a prenuptial agreement was an insult to the legal profession. It was an indenture. According to Section 4, in the event of a divorce, I would walk away with absolutely nothing. No alimony, no division of assets, not even the return of any personal investments I made during the marriage. But that was not the most astonishing part. Section 7 outlined a mandatory financial contribution. If I married Elijah, I was legally obligated to deposit 75% of my monthly income into something called the Sterling Family Legacy Trust. I flipped to the appendix to check the administrators of this trust. It was controlled entirely by Vivian. I kept reading. Section 9 stipulated that I would assume equal liability for any business debts Elijah incurred during our marriage, but I would have zero equity in any of his ventures. They were not just trying to protect their non-existent fortune. They were trying to enslave me financially. They wanted me to fund Vivian's crumbling lifestyle and underwrite Trey and Elijah's failing business schemes while stripping me of any legal rights or protections. I let my hands tremble slightly. I looked up at Elijah, forcing my eyes to fill with unshed tears. I channeled every ounce of vulnerability I could muster. Elijah. I whispered, my voice cracking perfectly. What is this? You want me to give 75% of my salary to your mother? Elijah sighed heavily, rubbing the bridge of his nose as if I was being entirely unreasonable. It is a family trust, Charmaine. It is how high net worth families build generational wealth. My mother manages the portfolio for all of us. You will still have your 25% for whatever little things you need. It is about contributing to the greater good of the Sterling name. But I get nothing if we divorce, I said, letting a tear slip down my cheek. And I have to take on your debts. Elijah, do you really think so little of me? Do you really believe I am just here for your money? Elijah leaned forward, his expression hardening into cold condescension. Look, Charmaine, I love you, but we have to be realistic. You come from a very different background. You do not understand how things work at this level of society. Wealthy families like ours need protection from gold diggers. It is nothing personal. It is just business. If you really love me, and if you are really not after my money signing, this should not be a problem. Dominique rolled her eyes loudly. Honestly, Elijah, I do not know why you are even explaining it to her. She should be grateful we are even letting her into the family. If she refuses to sign, just call Camille. I am sure she would love to have her ring back. Trey chuckled, swirling his scotch. Come on, Charmaine, do not ruin a good dinner. Just sign the paper so we can get back to talking about real money. Unless you are planning to take my brother-in-law to the cleaners. I sat there, the picture of a broken, humiliated woman. I let my shoulders slump. I looked down at the contract, my tear falling perfectly onto the thick parchment paper. Inside, my mind was racing with terrifying clarity. They had shown me exactly who they were. They were parasites, and they had just handed me the very weapon I would use to destroy them. Okay, I whispered softly, letting my voice sound utterly defeated. If this is what you need to trust me, Elijah, I will sign it. Vivian's eyes lit up with predatory triumph. She snapped her fingers at one of the servers. Bring the lady a pen. No need, I murmured, unzipping my cheap handbag. I have one right here. I pulled out a simple blue plastic pen. It looked like something you would buy in a bulk pack at a discount store. What Vivian and Elijah did not know was that this specific pen was filled with thermal erasable ink. It was a novelty item I kept in my bag for taking temporary notes on whiteboards. When exposed to heat, or simply left in a warm environment for a few weeks, the ink completely vanished, leaving the page entirely blank. I clicked the pen. I turned to the last page of the contract where the bright yellow sticky notes pointed to the signature lines. I slowly, deliberately signed my name in blue ink. I signed the main agreement, the liability waiver, and the trust contribution forms. Every single stroke of the pen was a guarantee of their upcoming ruin. I slid the heavy document back across the table toward Elijah. He snatched it up immediately, practically vibrating with relief and victory. He quickly checked the signatures, then handed it over to Vivian. Vivian stroked the cover of the document as if it were a prized pet. There now, she said smoothly, her tone dripping with fake maternal warmth. That was not so hard, was it? Welcome to the family, Charmaine. Just remember your place and we will get along wonderfully. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. The scrape of the wood against the marble floor echoed in the silent room. I am feeling a bit overwhelmed, I said quietly, keeping my eyes downcast. I think I need to go home. Thank you for dinner, Mrs. Sterling. Elijah did not stand up to walk me out. He was too busy celebrating with Trey. Just text me when you get back to your apartment, Charmaine, he said dismissively. I will call you tomorrow to go over the wedding budget. We need to figure out how much you can contribute now that the trust is active. I nodded meekly, turned around and walked out of the dining room. I walked through the grand foyer past the peeling paint and the stack of collection notices. I stepped out into the humid Atlanta night air, leaving the stifling toxicity of the Sterling estate behind me. As soon as the heavy oak door clicked shut, my posture changed. My slumped shoulders straightened. The fake tears dried instantly. My stride became sharp, purposeful, and lethal. I walked down the long driveway to my beat-up Honda Civic. I unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The radio flickered to life, but I muted it immediately. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system. I pulled out onto the dark, tree-lined streets of Buckhead, the tires of my car humming smoothly against the asphalt. I tapped a contact on my phone screen. It rang exactly once before a sharp professional voice answered. Good evening, boss, my financial investigator, Marcus said. How was the Sunday dinner? Enlightening. I replied, my voice steady and cold. I need you to initiate a full priority asset check on Vivian Sterling and her son-in-law, Trey Jenkins. I want a comprehensive dossier by tomorrow morning. Understood. What are we looking for exactly? Everything, I said, accelerating down the empty road. I want to know every cent they owe. I want their mortgage history, their credit card debts, their private loans, and any outstanding tax liens. I want to know who holds the paper on their liabilities, especially Vivian's house and Trey's new real estate fund. Marcus typed rapidly on his keyboard. The sound was like music to my ears. I am already pulling the preliminary public records on the estate. It looks messy, Charmaine. Multiple refinances. Good, I said, a genuine smile finally touching my lips. Find out exactly how fast we can buy their debt. I want my holding company to acquire every single financial obligation they have. I want to become their sole creditor. There was a brief pause on the line. Buying out private debt of that magnitude will require a significant cash layout, Marcus noted. Are you sure you want to proceed with a hostile financial takeover of your future in-laws? I glanced at the passenger seat where my cheap handbag sat. Inside it was the blue pen that had just signed away my rights, or so they thought. They are not my family, Marcus, I said softly, the glow of the streetlights flashing across my face. They are a bad investment, and it is time to liquidate them. Get me the numbers by 8 a.m. Consider it done, he replied, hanging up the phone. I drove through the city, watching the glittering skyline of Atlanta rise in the distance. The Sterling family thought they had trapped a naive, helpless bird in their gilded cage. They had no idea they had just locked themselves in with a predator. The game had officially shifted, and I held all the cards. I would let them enjoy their false sense of security for just a little while longer, because the higher they thought they climbed, the harder the fall was going to be. 3 weeks passed since that agonizing Sunday dinner. I played my part flawlessly, maintaining the quiet, compliant demeanor of a woman desperate to fit into a world she supposedly did not understand. The next mandatory family gathering was a Memorial Day barbecue hosted in Vivian's sprawling yet financially crumbling backyard. The Atlanta heat was already thick, hanging heavy over the manicured lawns and the large kidney-shaped swimming pool that clearly had not been resurfaced in a decade. Elijah had been distant all week, communicating mostly through short text messages about wedding logistics and reminding me to be on my best behavior. I arrived at the estate wearing a simple cotton dress, carrying a store-bought potato salad in a plastic container. Vivian took one look at the container, wrinkled her nose as if it were radioactive, and handed it directly to the hired bartender to throw away. I simply smiled, offering a polite apology while internally calculating the exact moment I would order the bank to foreclose on the very patio she was standing on. As the afternoon wore on, the guests mingled, sipping overpriced champagne and engaging in the kind of hollow, performative conversations that define the Sterling family social circle. I stood near the edge of the patio, observing. That was when Trey made his move. He broke away from a group of men discussing golf handicaps and sauntered over to me. He was wearing a pastel pink polo shirt and crisp white linen trousers, looking every bit the successful young real estate mogul he pretended to be. But up close, I noticed the faint sheen of sweat on his forehead that had nothing to do with the summer heat. His eyes were restless, darting around the yard before locking onto me with a predatory intensity. "Having fun?" Charmaine Trey asked, leaning against the stone railing and flashing a blindingly white, perfectly veneered smile. "It is a beautiful party," I replied softly, keeping my voice light and entirely non-threatening. Trey chuckled, swirling the ice in his glass. "Yes, Vivian knows how to throw a party. But listen, Charmaine, I actually wanted to talk to you about something important." Family to family, I turned to face him, widening my eyes slightly to project naive curiosity. "Of course, Trey. What is it?" He leaned in closer, dropping his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Elijah and I were talking the other night. He mentioned you have about $40,000 sitting in a standard low-yield savings account. Now I am not going to judge. But keeping cash stagnant like that is a rookie mistake. Inflation is eating your money alive." I felt a cold flash of anger toward Elijah. He had handed over my fake financial details to his brother-in-law without a second thought. I had intentionally told Elijah about that $40,000 account early in our relationship to test his discretion. He had failed spectacularly. "I just like knowing my money is safe," I said, playing the part of the financially illiterate girlfriend. "Safe is for people who want to stay poor," Trey countered smoothly. "Look, Charmaine, you are entering a high net worth family. Vivian is old school. She respects people who bring value to the table. Right now she sees you as a liability, a financial drain on her son. But I can help you change that. I can help you buy into the family." "Buy into the family," I repeated, letting a trace of confusion slip into my tone. "Exactly," Trey said, his eyes gleaming with greedy desperation. "I am launching a new private equity fund next week. Commercial real estate acquisitions in the downtown sector. Guaranteed returns of over 200% in the first year. The minimum buy-in is usually $250,000, but because you are marrying my brother-in-law, I am willing to let you slide in at the ground floor with your 40 grand. You hand me that capital, I double it by the wedding, and Vivian suddenly sees you as a sharp contributing member of the Sterling Empire." Before I could even formulate a response to his absurd, completely illegal financial pitch, the sharp click of designer heels echoed on the stone patio. Dominique walked over, holding a plate of grilled asparagus. She looked at me with her usual expression of bored disdain. "Are you giving her the pitch?" Trey Dominique asked, sliding her arm through his. "Honestly, baby, I do not know why you bother. She probably does not even understand what equity means." Trey laughed, kissing his wife's cheek. "I am just trying to help her out, Dom. She needs a win." Dominique turned her piercing gaze on me. "You really do, Charmaine. I saw you pull up in that tragic 2012 Honda Civic today. Do you have any idea how embarrassing it is for us to have that metal eyesore parked in our driveway? Give Trey the money. Let him work his magic. Maybe the returns will help you buy a car that does not make us look like we are running a charity program at the country club." I kept my hands folded neatly in front of me, suppressing the urge to laugh. Dominique was mocking a car that I drove by choice, completely unaware that the watch on her wrist was funded by maxed-out credit cards. "I do not know," I murmured, looking down at my shoes. 40,000 is everything I have. It took me years to save that from my administrative job. I was hoping to use it for a down payment on a house for me and Elijah." A heavy hand landed on my shoulder. I flinched slightly. It was Elijah. He had materialized behind me, smelling strongly of bourbon and expensive cologne. His grip on my shoulder was tight, controlling, and entirely devoid of affection. "We do not need a down payment, Charmaine," Elijah said, his voice hard and authoritative. "We will be living in the condo. And my mother's trust will handle our major expenses once we are married. What we need right now is liquidity for Trey's fund. I looked up at my fiancé. Elijah, you cannot be serious. You want me to give Trey my entire life savings. Elijah's jaw tightened. Do not make this difficult, Charmaine. Marriage is a merger. It is about pooling resources. Trey is offering you a golden opportunity to prove you are a team player. My mother is already furious about the wedding budget. If you withhold capital from the family fund, you are showing us that you do not trust us. And if there is no trust, maybe we need to seriously consider postponing this wedding until you are ready to be a real sterling. The ultimatum hung in the humid air. It was a perfectly orchestrated shakedown. Trey provided the fake opportunity, Dominique provided the social humiliation, and Elijah provided the emotional blackmail. They were trying to bully a supposedly broke woman out of her last dime to fund their fraudulent lifestyle. They were so confident in their superiority, so absolutely certain that my desperation to marry into their family would blind me to their blatant theft. Right at that moment, a distinct vibration pulsed against my thigh. My phone was in the pocket of my dress. I slowly pulled the device out. The screen lit up with a secure encrypted text message from Marcus, my financial investigator. I glanced down my face, maintaining an expression of distressed hesitation. The text was brief, brutal, and entirely illuminating. Marcus, full dossier complete. Trey's real estate fund does not exist. It is a shell company masking a massive Ponzi scheme. He is completely insolvent. Worse, he owes $2.5 million to a syndicate of unregulated private lenders out of Miami. They are threatening him. He is desperate for cash to cover the interest payments. Do not engage. I read the words twice, committing every terrifying detail to memory. Trey was not just a scam artist. He was a dead man walking. He owed millions to dangerous people, and he was trying to steal my meager $40,000 just to buy himself a few more days of breathing room. And Elijah, my supposed protector, was actively helping him do it. I locked the phone screen and slipped it back into my pocket. The crushing weight of their betrayal should have hurt. Instead, it felt liberating. The last tiny thread of guilt I had about destroying them vanished completely. I looked up at Trey, then at Dominique, and finally at Elijah. I let a soft, nervous smile spread across my face. I want to be a team player, Elijah, I said, my voice trembling perfectly with fake compliance. I really do. I want your mother to be proud of me. Elijah relaxed visibly, his grip on my shoulder loosening. He exchanged a triumphant look with Trey. That is my girl, Elijah said smoothly. I knew you would see reason. Trey pulled out his phone, his fingers moving rapidly. Great. I will email you the wire transfer instructions right now. You can authorize the release of the funds first thing Tuesday morning after the holiday. I kept my naive, bright smile firmly in place. I looked directly into Trey's desperate, sweating face. Of course, Trey, I said sweetly, my voice carrying the light, breezy tone of an absolute fool. But since it is my entire life savings, I will need to see the paperwork first. Just the standard prospectus and the escrow account details. As soon as I review those, I will sign whatever you need. Trey's smile froze. A flash of genuine panic crossed his eyes, gone as quickly as it appeared. He was not expecting the quiet, compliant administrative assistant to ask for legal documentation, but he had no choice but to agree. Yeah, absolutely, Trey managed to say, his voice suddenly sounding tight and hollow. I will get that drawn up for you. I nodded happily, turning my back on the three of them to walk toward the buffet table. The trap was set. The paperwork Trey was about to fabricate would be the exact evidence I needed to hand him over to the federal authorities. 2 days after the Memorial Day barbecue, my phone lit up with an uncharacteristically cheerful text message from Dominique. She invited me to join her and Vivian at a luxury bridal boutique in the heart of Buckhead. According to her message, it was time to officially welcome me into the inner circle by helping me select the perfect wedding gown. I knew better than to believe a single word of it. Dominique did not do favors, and Vivian certainly did not spend her Tuesday afternoons helping a woman she despised. They had an angle. I replied with a polite confirmation, dressed in my usual unbranded modest clothing, and drove my old Honda to the address provided. The boutique was called Elle Etoile, an ultra-exclusive appointment-only salon that catered exclusively to Atlanta high society. The exterior was understated, marked only by a small gold plaque next to a heavy mahogany door. Inside the space was a sea of plush white velvet sofas, towering crystal chandeliers, and walls lined with custom silk gowns protected by glass displays. The air smelled of expensive gardenias and chilled champagne. When I arrived, Vivian and Dominique were already seated on a semicircular velvet couch in the private viewing suite. They were sipping mimosas from crystal flutes, acting as if they owned the entire establishment. Vivian barely glanced up when I walked in. She waved a manicured hand toward a small, rigid accent chair positioned off to the side, silently indicating where I was supposed to sit. I took my seat, placing my cheap handbag on my lap. A sales associate named Giselle, dressed entirely in sleek black, glided into the room. She carried a clipboard and looked at me with a tightly controlled expression of polite confusion. She clearly recognized that my outfit did not match the typical financial profile of their clientele. "Welcome to Elle Etoile, Giselle," said her voice dripping with practiced elegance. "We are so thrilled to assist with the bridal styling today. Who is the lucky bride?" I opened my mouth to speak, but Dominique immediately stood up and smoothed her designer skirt. "We will get to her eventually," Dominique said dismissively, gesturing toward me without even making eye contact. "But first, I need to finalize my gown for the reception. As the groom's sister, I will be hosting several VIP tables, and I need something that reflects the Sterling family standard. Bring out the custom Monaco collection." Giselle nodded obediently and disappeared into the back room. I sat in silence, watching the performance unfold. This was supposed to be my bridal appointment. This was the day a bride was meant to feel cherished and celebrated. Instead, it had been hijacked within 30 seconds. Vivian took a slow sip of her mimosa, her eyes locked onto the empty pedestal in the center of the room. She did not ask me what style of dress I liked. She did not ask about my budget or my preferences. She acted as if I were merely an audience member brought in to witness their opulence. For the next hour, Dominique paraded out of the fitting room in a series of increasingly extravagant gowns. These were not bridesmaid dresses or standard evening wear. They were elaborate show-stopping pieces covered in hand-sewn pearls, imported French lace, and dramatic Swarovski crystal embellishments. Each dress was more breathtaking and aggressively expensive than the last. She twirled in front of the massive floor-to-ceiling mirrors, admiring her own reflection while Vivian showered her with endless praise. Finally, Dominique stepped out in a stunning form-fitting champagne silk gown with a cathedral-length train heavily embroidered with silver thread. It was an absolute masterpiece of haute couture. It was also undeniably bridal. If she wore that to my wedding, she would look exactly like the bride, which of course was exactly her intention. "This is the one," Vivian gasped, clutching her chest theatrically. "Oh, Dominique, you look like absolute royalty. Your brother will be so proud to have you standing beside him in photographs." Dominique smiled at her reflection, running her hands down the smooth silk. "I love it. Giselle, what is the damage on this piece?" Giselle consulted her tablet, her face completely neutral. "This is a custom piece from our Paris atelier. With the necessary rush alterations to have it ready for the wedding date, the total comes to $22,400. I kept my face perfectly blank. I knew people who bought cars for less money. I also knew, based on the financial dossier sitting in my secure email inbox, that Dominique's credit cards were currently maxed out at $80,000, and she was 3 months behind on her luxury SUV lease. She did not have $22,000. She did not even have $2,000. Dominique did not flinch at the price. She simply turned her head, looked directly at me through the mirror, and smiled a cold, calculating smile. "Perfect," Dominique said brightly. "Put it on her tab." Giselle blinked, clearly caught off guard. She looked from Dominique to me, her tablet hovering in the air. "I am sorry, miss. You want me to charge the reception gown to the bride's account?" "Yes," Dominique said, turning around to face me fully. She crossed her arms, looking entirely pleased with herself. "Consider it my sister-in-law tax. A small token of appreciation for allowing you into our family circle." Besides, Charmaine, you told Elijah you have all that money just sitting around in your savings account doing nothing. Trey said you were going to invest it. But this is a much more immediate way to show your loyalty. Vivian nodded in eager agreement, setting her mimosa glass down on the glass coffee table. Exactly. It is traditional for the bride's family to pay for the wedding expenses. Since you clearly do not have a family capable of contributing to a sterling-level event, picking up the tab for Dominique's gown is the absolute least you can do to compensate. The sheer audacity of the demand hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. They were cornering me in a high-end boutique using a mix of societal pressure and psychological bullying to extort over $20,000 from me. They assumed I would be too embarrassed to say no in front of the snooty sales associate. They assumed my desperation to marry Elijah would force me to hand over my debit card. I looked at Dominique in her incredibly expensive dress. I looked at Vivian, whose own house was currently slipping into foreclosure. Then I looked at Giselle, who was standing awkwardly against the wall trying to make herself invisible. I stood up from the rigid little chair. I smoothed the skirt of my inexpensive cotton dress. No, I said softly. The single word fell like a lead weight in the pristine room. Dominique dropped her arms, her smug smile vanishing instantly. Excuse me. I said no, Dominique? I repeated, my voice calm, even and entirely devoid of embarrassment. I will not be paying $22,000 for your dress. I am here to look for my own wedding gown. If you cannot afford the piece you are wearing, I suggest you ask Giselle to show you something in the clearance section. Vivian's face turned an alarming shade of crimson, the veins in her neck strained against her pearl choker. She shot up from the velvet sofa, her voice rising to a shrill, echoing pitch that immediately drew the attention of other wealthy clients in the adjacent viewing suites. How dare you speak to my daughter that way? Vivian shrieked, abandoning any pretense of high society elegance. You broke selfish little leech. We invite you into the most exclusive salon in the city. We offer you the privilege of contributing to a sterling family event, and you embarrass us like this. You are nothing but a common gold digger trying to ride my son's coattails. I did not raise my voice to match hers. I simply maintained eye contact, letting her absolute lack of class expose itself to everyone in the boutique. Please lower your voice, Mrs. Sterling, I said coolly. You are making a scene. I will make whatever scene I want, Vivian snarled, taking a threatening step toward me. You are a fraud, Charmaine. You wear cheap clothes, you drive a garbage car, and you refuse to contribute a single dime to this family. You are ruining the Sterling name just by breathing the same air as us. Before I could deliver a response, my phone buzzed violently in my hand. I glanced down at the screen. It was a text message from Elijah. Vivian must have texted him from the couch the moment I refused to pay. The message from my fiancé was incredibly brief and brutally clear. Pay for the dress or do not bother coming home. The wedding is off if you humiliate my mother today. I stared at the glowing screen. This was it. This was the final piece of the puzzle. Elijah was not a victim of his mother's manipulation. He was an active participant in the extortion. He was fully willing to trade our future marriage for a piece of silk and lace. The man I thought I loved was nothing more than a hollow shell stuffed full of greed and vanity. I slowly placed my phone back into my handbag. I looked up at Vivian, who was breathing heavily, waiting for me to break down and hand over the money. I looked at Dominique, who was clutching the fabric of the expensive gown as if her life depended on it. I think we are done here, I said quietly. I turned my back on them and walked out of the private suite. You walk out that door and you are entirely cut off, Vivian screamed after me, her voice echoing off the crystal chandeliers. Elijah will dump you before you even reach your pathetic little car. You hear me? You are nothing without us. I ignored her. I walked past the horrified sales associates and out the heavy mahogany front door. The humid Atlanta air hit my face, feeling surprisingly refreshing after the toxic atmosphere of the boutique. I did not shed a single tear. I did not feel an ounce of heartbreak. I only felt a cold, calculating focus. I walked across the manicured parking lot to my Honda Civic. As I reached the driver's side door, my phone buzzed again. This time it was not a text from Elijah. It was an encrypted priority email from Marcus, my financial investigator. I leaned against the hood of my car and opened the message. Marcus had delivered exactly what I asked for. The email contained a high-priority legal alert from the Fulton County Banking Authority. Vivian Sterling's Buckhead estate had officially defaulted on its third mortgage. She had missed the final grace period payment at noon today because of the complex and high-risk nature of her multiple refinances. The bank was not going to a standard public auction. They were quietly liquidating the distressed debt to private institutional buyers in exactly 48 hours. Vivian was standing inside that bridal boutique screaming about her legacy and her wealth, completely unaware that she was 48 hours away from being legally homeless. I unlocked my car, slid into the driver's seat, and closed the door, sealing myself in silence. I connected my phone to the car's Bluetooth system and dialed a direct line to my corporate acquisitions manager at Z Holdings. He answered on the first ring. "Good afternoon, boss," he said professionally. "I need you to pull the debt file on the Sterling estate in Buckhead." I ordered, my voice hard and sharp as cut glass. "The bank is auctioning the mortgage debt in 48 hours. I do not want to participate in a bidding war. I want you to contact the senior loan officer directly." "Understood?" he replied, the sound of rapid typing echoing over the line. "What is our ceiling for the acquisition?" "There is no ceiling," I said, staring at my reflection in the rearview mirror. "Buy Vivian's mortgage. Full cash offer. Pay whatever premium they ask to close the deal by tomorrow morning. I want the absolute, undisputed rights to that property. And once the transfer is legally complete, I want you to draft the immediate eviction notices." "Consider it done, Charmaine," he said. "Will there be anything else?" "No." I smiled, a genuine, terrifying smile. "That will be all for today." I ended the call. I put the car in gear and drove away from the boutique, leaving the Sterling family to their delusions. They wanted me to buy into the family. They wanted me to pay a sister-in-law tax. I was going to give them exactly what they asked for. I was going to buy them entirely, and then I was going to liquidate them. The annual Atlanta Children's Foundation Gala was the highlight of the spring social season, a night where the city's elite gathered under one roof to showcase their wealth under the convenient guise of philanthropy. The event took place just 2 days after the incident at the bridal boutique. Elijah had bombarded my phone with angry texts, demanding I apologize to his mother and warning me not to embarrass the family at the gala. I sent back a single vague text acknowledging his message, just enough to ensure my ticket to the event was not revoked. I needed to be there. I needed to watch them parade their fake wealth right before the floor fell out from under them. I arrived at the downtown luxury hotel ballroom wearing a simple, unbranded black evening gown. To the untrained eye, it looked like an off-the-rack purchase from a discount department store. In reality, it was a bespoke piece crafted by an independent designer in Milan, made of the finest silk crepe that moved like liquid shadow. I pulled my Honda Civic up to the valet stand, completely ignoring the condescending look the attendant gave my vehicle as it sat idling behind a line of Bentleys and imported sports cars. I handed him the keys with a polite smile and walked through the towering glass doors. The ballroom was a masterpiece of extravagant excess. Massive crystal chandeliers hung from the vaulted ceiling, casting a warm golden glow over the sea of attendees. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the low, constant hum of networking. Waiters in crisp white tuxedos glided through the crowd carrying silver trays of champagne and caviar. It was a room full of predators wearing designer suits and couture gowns, all smiling at each other while secretly calculating how to leverage their connections. Before I could even locate my assigned table on the seating chart display, Vivian materialized in front of me. She was wearing a heavy emerald green velvet gown that looked far too warm for the Atlanta weather, her neck draped in diamonds that I knew for a fact were heavily insured and heavily leveraged. Charmaine, Vivian said, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness, as several of her wealthy friends stood nearby pretending not to listen. "I am so glad you decided to show up. I was worried you might feel too intimidated by this kind of environment." "It is a beautiful event, Mrs. Sterling," I replied evenly, keeping my face perfectly neutral. "I am looking forward to sitting with Elijah." Vivian's artificial smile tightened. She let out a soft, patronizing sigh, placing a hand on her chest. Oh, my dear, there has been a dreadful mix-up with the seating arrangements. The gala organizers miscounted the VIP allocations. Our family table is simply at capacity. But do not worry, I made sure they found a spot for you. She turned and pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the absolute back of the massive ballroom. My eyes followed her gesture. Way in the back, tucked behind a massive floral pillar, and right next to the swinging wooden doors of the catering kitchen, was a small overflow table. It was designated for junior staff members, low-level vendors, and last-minute additions who did not warrant a view of the stage. Elijah felt terrible about it. Of course, Vivian lied smoothly, her eyes gleaming with malice. But as a senior sales director, he simply must sit at the premier table to entertain our most important clients. I am sure you understand. You can just slip into the back and enjoy your meal quietly. I looked back at Vivian. She was waiting for me to argue. She wanted me to throw a tantrum to cause a scene in front of her country club friends, so she could finally label me as the hysterical, unclassy woman she desperately wanted me to be. That is perfectly fine, I said, my voice calm and untroubled. I prefer a quiet spot anyway. Enjoy your evening. I did not wait for her response. I turned and navigated my way through the labyrinth of tables, ignoring the sharp, judgmental glances of the women who scrutinized my unbranded dress. I reached the overflow table and took my seat. The chair was wobbly. The tablecloth was slightly wrinkled. Every 30 seconds, the heavy wooden doors of the kitchen swung open, hitting the back of my chair and letting out a blast of hot air and the clattering sound of dishwashers. It was the ultimate social exile. From my vantage point in the shadows, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the Sterling family table at the very front of the room, right beneath the stage. Elijah was sitting exactly where his mother had orchestrated, and sitting directly to his right, wearing a plunging crimson designer dress and laughing loudly at something he said was Camille, the wealthy surgeon's daughter. Surgeons. The ex-girlfriend Vivian was so desperate to welcome back into the family. I watched as Elijah leaned in close to Camille, his hand casually brushing against her arm. He looked completely relaxed, fully immersed in the illusion of wealth and status that she provided. He did not look around the room to find me. He did not text to apologize for the seating arrangement. He simply erased me from his mind the moment he was surrounded by people he deemed more important. The betrayal was blatant, public, and intentionally cruel. Any normal woman would have been crushed. I simply felt validated. The lingering fragments of guilt I held about executing their financial ruin evaporated in the hot, chaotic air blowing from the kitchen. I sipped my ice water, watching them perform their pantomime of success, knowing that the countdown to their destruction was quietly ticking away in the background. Dinner was served. While the VIP tables feasted on prime rib and truffle potatoes, my table was served a dry, overcooked chicken dish that had clearly been sitting under a heat lamp for hours. I ate a few bites, my mind entirely focused on the digital portfolio resting in my handbag. My acquisitions manager had confirmed that morning that Z Holdings now officially held the deed to Vivian's Buckhead estate. The eviction paperwork was already sitting in a sealed envelope on my desk, waiting for Monday morning. As the dessert plates were cleared, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight hit the center stage, and a charismatic auctioneer in a sharp tuxedo stepped up to the microphone. The charity auction was the main event of the night. It was less about raising money for children and more about public ego-stroking. Wealthy men and women threw exorbitant amounts of money at luxury items simply to hear their names called out over the sound system. Ladies and gentlemen, the auctioneer announced, his voice booming through the speakers. Let us begin the bidding for our premier vacation package. A 2-week all-inclusive stay at a private villa in the Maldives, complete with first-class airfare and a dedicated staff. We will open the bidding at $5,000. Paddles shot up around the room. 6,000, 7,000, 8,000. I watched the Sterling table. Trey was shifting in his seat, his eyes darting around the room. His pastel suit stood out aggressively under the dim lighting. He needed to make a statement. He needed to project the image of a wildly successful real estate mogul, especially since his fraudulent funds were currently imploding behind closed doors. Trey suddenly stood up, pushing his chair back violently. He grabbed his bidding paddle and shot his hand straight into the air. $10,000, Trey shouted, his voice echoing across the silent ballroom. A murmur of impressed approval rippled through the crowd. $10,000 was a massive bid for the opening item. People clapped politely, turning their heads to admire the generous young investor. Trey soaked up the attention like a sponge. He turned around, scanning the room until his eyes finally landed on my table in the dark corner. He looked right at me, raised his champagne glass in a mocking toast, and flashed a vicious, superior smirk. He was using $10,000. He did not have to publicly mock my supposed poverty. He was trying to show me exactly how insignificant I was in their world. The auctioneer pointed directly at Trey. "We have $10,000 from the gentleman in the front. Going once, going twice, sold for $10,000. The room erupted in applause. Dominique kissed Trey's cheek, looking incredibly proud of her husband. Elijah clapped him on the back. They were the stars of the room. They felt invincible. I set my water glass down on the wrinkled tablecloth. I reached into my handbag and pulled out my phone. The screen illuminated my face with a harsh blue light. I opened my secure banking application and navigated to the philanthropic wing of my venture capital firm. The interface was clean and simple. I tapped the screen, entering the routing number for the Atlanta Children's Foundation, which had been printed on the back of the gala program. I typed in a number, $100,000. I selected the option for an immediate wire transfer. Under the donor recognition tab, I checked the box marked strictly anonymous. I did not need my name announced. I did not need the applause of a room full of hypocrites. I just needed to completely shatter their moment of glory. I pressed submit. The screen loaded for exactly 2 seconds before displaying a bright green confirmation checkmark. On stage, the auctioneer was preparing to announce the next item when a woman wearing a headset rushed out from behind the curtain. She handed him a small tablet, whispering frantically into his ear. The auctioneer looked at the screen, his eyes widening in absolute shock. He tapped the microphone, demanding the room's immediate attention. "Ladies and gentlemen, please," the auctioneer said, his professional composure cracking to reveal genuine astonishment. "I have just received an update from our financial team. We have just received a direct real-time wire transfer directly into the Foundation's operational account." The room went completely silent. Even Trey stopped gloating, turning back to face the stage with a look of confused irritation. "An anonymous donor," the auctioneer continued, his voice trembling slightly with excitement, "has just contributed $100,000 to the Foundation." A collective gasp sucked the air right out of the ballroom. $100,000 in a single unprompted donation was unheard of for this particular event. It dwarfed Trey's pathetic $10,000 bid, completely rendering his moment of grandstanding instantly forgettable. The crowd erupted into wild, deafening applause. People were looking around frantically, trying to guess which billionaire in the room had authorized the massive transfer. Trey sat back down heavily, his face flushing with embarrassment, as the spotlight physically and metaphorically moved off him. Dominique crossed her arms, visibly annoyed that their moment of glory had been hijacked. Vivian was craning her neck, desperately searching the VIP tables to see who had outspent her family. None of them looked toward the back of the room. None of them looked at the drafty table near the swinging kitchen doors. I locked my phone screen and slipped it back into my handbag. I picked up my water glass and took a slow, refreshing sip. The chaos in the room was beautiful. The Sterling family thought they controlled the narrative. They thought they possessed all the power because they knew how to play the social game. But they failed to realize that while they were fighting for attention on the stage, I was the one quietly funding the entire theater. The gala continued, but the energy had permanently shifted. Trey sulked in his chair for the rest of the night. Elijah spent the evening trying to impress Camille, completely unaware that his entire financial future was actively disintegrating. I sat in the shadows, perfectly content in my exile. I did not need a seat at their table anymore. I was going to tear the whole damn table down. 2 nights later, Elijah stood in the doorway of my modest townhouse, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored navy suit with an air of immense self-importance. He had barely spoken to me since the charity gala, punishing me with his silence for not bowing down to his mother at the bridal boutique. But tonight he needed me to play a specific role. He had practically ordered me to accompany him to a private dining room at one of Atlanta's most exclusive steakhouses. Trey was hosting a VIP investors' dinner to officially launch his new real estate fund. "You need to pay close attention tonight, Charmaine." Elijah lectured, his tone dripping with condescension as I slipped on my coat. "You have been acting incredibly small-minded lately. You do not understand how real wealth is generated. Trey is going to be moving millions of dollars tonight. I want you to sit there, keep your mouth shut, and learn how real money works. Maybe then you will understand why my family operates the way we do." I nodded slowly, keeping my expression perfectly blank. I am always eager to learn, Elijah. The private dining room at the steakhouse was an exercise in aggressive financial theater. The walls were lined with dark mahogany and vintage wine bottles. Waiters circulated with silver trays of Wagyu beef sliders and top-shelf scotch. The room was packed with about 40 people, mostly mid-level professionals, ambitious local business owners, and a few minor local celebrities. They were the perfect targets for a scam artist. They were people who had just enough money to invest, but not enough financial literacy to spot a fraud. Vivian and Dominique were holding court near the front of the room, sipping champagne and acting as if they were already billionaires. Dominique was wearing a new diamond necklace, no doubt purchased on the assumption that Trey's fund was going to make them untouchably rich. When Elijah and I walked in, Vivian shot me a look of pure disgust, turning her back to me completely. I quietly took a seat at a table near the back, perfectly positioned to watch the entire room. At exactly 8 o'clock, the lights dimmed. Trey stepped up to a small podium at the front of the room. He was wearing a sharp, custom charcoal suit, projecting the absolute pinnacle of corporate confidence. A large projection screen dropped down behind him. "Welcome, everyone," Trey began, his voice smooth and charismatic, echoing through the silent room. "You are here tonight because you are the elite. You are the visionaries. While the rest of the world is busy working for a paycheck, you are looking for ways to make your money work for you. And tonight, I am going to hand you the keys to the kingdom." He clicked a button on his remote. The screen behind him lit up with a high-resolution drone photograph of a massive, sprawling commercial property. My heart gave a steady, measured thud. I knew every inch of that property. It was the Peachtree Commercial Plaza. The very same plaza my venture capital firm Z Holdings had officially acquired just days ago. The deed was currently locked in my secure corporate safe. "This, ladies and gentlemen, is the crown jewel of downtown Atlanta," Trey announced, pacing the floor with the energy of a mega-church pastor. "Prime commercial real estate. Currently distressed due to poor previous management, but the bones are flawless. My private equity firm has officially secured the exclusive deed to this property. We have the zoning permits cleared for a massive luxury redevelopment. We are talking high-end retail luxury condominiums and a boutique hotel." He clicked to the next slide, showing fabricated architectural renderings of a futuristic glass and steel complex. The crowd murmured in awe. I took a slow sip of my sparkling water, fascinated by the sheer audacity of his lie. He was standing in front of 40 people claiming ownership of a $30 million asset that belonged entirely to me. "The projected returns on this project are staggering." Trey continued, leaning into the podium and lowering his voice to create a false sense of intimacy. "We are looking at a minimum 200% return on investment within the first 18 months. But here is the catch. Real estate moves fast. The closing window is tight. I am opening up the mezzanine funding round tonight, and tonight only. The minimum buy-in is $50,000. If you want a piece of this legacy, I need wire transfers initiated by the end of this dinner. Those who hesitate will be left behind." The aggressive sales tactic was classic Ponzi scheme behavior. Create a false sense of urgency, promise impossible returns, and pressure the marks into parting with their cash before they have time to consult a lawyer or a financial advisor. I looked around the room. I could see the greed and desperation lighting up the faces of the guests. They were reaching for their phones, whispering excitedly to their spouses. Elijah was practically vibrating in his seat next to me. He stood up suddenly, his chair scraping loudly against the hardwood floor. Every eye in the room turned to him. "Trey, my man," Elijah called out, his voice booming with forced masculine bravado. "I just want to say something. I have known this man for years. He is family. He is brilliant. And I believe in this project so much that I am not just putting my name on the line. I am putting my money where my mouth is." Elijah paused dramatically, soaking in the attention of the wealthy room. "This morning I finalized a second mortgage on my condo," Elijah announced proudly. "I pulled $100,000 in equity, and I am wiring every single cent of it into this fund tonight. That is how much I believe in the Sterling family vision." A round of enthusiastic applause erupted from the crowd. Trey pointed finger guns at Elijah, beaming with predatory joy. Vivian dabbed at her eyes with a napkin, looking at her son as if he had just won a Nobel Prize. Dominique clapped loudly, throwing a smug, triumphant look in my direction. I sat there utterly astounded by Elijah's stupidity. The condo he had just mortgaged was the very same condo we were supposed to live in after the wedding. He had secretly leveraged our supposed future home, taking on massive high-interest debt, all to hand the cash over to a man who was actively being hunted by Miami loan sharks. Elijah had not just dug his own grave. He had jumped in and pulled the dirt down on top of himself. The applause died down. Trey picked up his tablet, ready to start taking names and processing the fraudulent wire transfers. "All right, let's get down to business." Trey smiled, his eyes gleaming with greed. "Who is ready to make their first deposit?" I placed my water glass down on the table. The sound was soft, but in my mind it echoed like a starting pistol. I smoothed the napkin on my lap. I took a deep breath, channeling the persona of the timid, easily confused girlfriend one last time. I stood up. The movement caught Trey's eye. His smile faltered for a fraction of a second when he saw me standing there in my plain black dress, looking entirely out of place among the designer suits and cocktail gowns. Elijah looked at me, his eyes widening in panic. He aggressively motioned with his hand for me to sit back down. Terrified that his broke fiancée was going to embarrass him in front of the investors, I ignored him. I tilted my head, putting on a perfectly innocent, slightly bewildered expression. Excuse me, Trey," I called out, my voice slightly hesitant, making sure to project just enough so the entire room could hear me. "I am so sorry to interrupt. I know I am not a financial expert like everyone else here. I am just trying to learn like Elijah told me to." Trey forced a tight, condescending smile. "It's okay, Charmaine. There are no stupid questions. What do you need to know? Just keep it quick, we have investors waiting." I nodded eagerly, as if grateful for his patience. "Well, it is just that I was reading an article about commercial real estate the other day, and I got a little confused by the terminology. You mentioned that your firm holds the exclusive deed to the Peachtree Plaza." "That is correct," Trey said stiffly, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Right." I continued, tapping my chin thoughtfully. "But the article I read said that when a property is acquired out of a distressed state, the deed does not immediately clear into a standard holding account. It has to pass through a specific title holding company during the clearance period." A few of the actual business owners in the room nodded slowly, recognizing the basic legal concept. Trey shifted his weight, his knuckles turning white as he gripped the edges of the podium. "Yes, well, that is a technicality we already handled." Trey brushed off, trying to move on. "Oh, good," I smiled brightly, because I actually looked up the public county records for the Peachtree Plaza this afternoon, just trying to educate myself. And the records show that the deed was fully executed and transferred yesterday morning to a venture capital firm called Z Holdings. The room went dead silent. You could hear a pin drop. I took one step forward, my voice losing the hesitant flutter and dropping into a precise, razor-sharp cadence. "So my question is this, Trey. If Z Holdings holds the absolute unencumbered deed to the Peachtree Plaza and they have not authorized any mezzanine debt structuring or secondary equity offerings, how exactly are you selling shares to a property you do not legally own? Furthermore, since your private equity fund is not registered with the Securities and Exchange Commission, What escrow account are these wire transfers going into tonight? Because according to federal banking regulations, commingling unverified investor funds without a verified SEC escrow agent constitutes felony wire fraud. Trey's face drained of all color. He looked like he had just been struck by lightning. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. The confident, slick salesman had completely vanished, replaced by a terrified criminal caught in the headlights. Elijah was frozen in his chair, his jaw hanging open, staring at me as if I had just grown a second head. Vivian and Dominique looked equally paralyzed, their champagne glasses suspended in midair. The investors in the room were not stupid. They might have been blinded by greed minutes ago, but the mention of SEC violations and felony wire fraud snapped them back to reality instantly. Phones that were out to initiate wire transfers were slowly lowered to the tables. The atmosphere in the room turned instantly hostile. Well, Trey, a wealthy local contractor sitting near the front, demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Are you going to answer the little lady's question? Where exactly is our money going tonight? Trey began to sweat profusely. He loosened his expensive silk tie, his eyes darting frantically toward the exit doors. Look, there is a misunderstanding, he stammered, his voice cracking. The paperwork is just delayed. Z Holdings is a subsidiary. We are working out the final structures. He was lying, and everyone in the room knew it. The whispers started. Chairs scraped as people began standing up. The illusion was shattered. The VIP investors' dinner had just turned into a federal crime scene, and I stood quietly in the back of the room watching the flames rise. The VIP investors' dinner had just turned into a federal crime scene, and I stood quietly in the back of the room, watching the flames rise. I did not stay to watch the authorities arrive. I slipped out through the heavy mahogany doors, while the enraged investors were physically backing Trey into a corner. I handed my valet ticket to the attendant, tipped him generously, and drove my cheap Honda Civic back to the small, unremarkable townhouse I rented strictly for appearances. I unlocked the deadbolt, stepped inside the cramped living room, and sat down on the discount sofa. I did not turn on the television. I simply poured myself a glass of tap water and waited for the inevitable explosion. It took exactly 47 minutes. The flimsy front door of my apartment flew open, the brass handle slamming violently against the drywall and leaving a deep, ugly dent. Elijah stood in the threshold, breathing like a cornered animal. His custom navy suit jacket was gone. His expensive silk tie was yanked loose, hanging haphazardly around his neck. His face was flushed, a dark, dangerous shade of crimson, and his eyes were completely unhinged. He looked nothing like the polished, charming corporate director I had met at that coffee shop a year ago. He looked exactly like what he was, a desperate, terrified man who had just watched his entire fake empire begin to crumble. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Elijah screamed, kicking the door shut behind him with such force that the cheap framed pictures on my wall rattled. I sat perfectly still, holding my water glass with both hands. I widened my eyes, projecting a flawless image of terrified confusion. "I do not understand, Elijah. What did I do? I was just trying to learn about real estate." "Exactly like you told me to." "Do not play stupid with me, Charmaine!" he roared, pacing the short length of my living room like a caged tiger. "You humiliated my family. You intentionally stood up in a room full of millionaires and asked a ridiculous, uneducated question just to make Trey look bad. You are so violently jealous of our success that you actively tried to sabotage a multi-million-dollar deal." And I set my glass down on the scratched coffee table. "Elijah, I was just asking about the deed. I looked it up online. If Z Holdings owns the property, how can Trey sell shares?" Elijah stopped pacing and pointed a trembling accusatory finger directly at my face. "Because you do not understand high-level corporate finance. Trey is running a complex mezzanine debt structure. Z Holdings is probably just a shell corporation he set up for tax purposes. You do not know how the law works. But your stupid, reckless little stunt caused a panic." The investors pulled their wire transfers. Everyone walked out. "Do you have any idea what you just cost us?" He was so deeply entrenched in the lie that he was actively fabricating excuses for a man who had just stolen his home equity. It was a spectacular display of cognitive dissonance. I am sorry if I messed up, I whispered, looking down at my lap, letting my shoulders slump. I really thought I was asking a smart question. Sorry does not fix this, Charmaine. Elijah sneered, stepping closer until he was towering over me. His shadow fell across my face, heavy and oppressive. Sorry does not recover the capital Trey lost tonight. You embarrassed my mother, you insulted my sister, and you made me look like an absolute fool for bringing a broke, ignorant administrative assistant to a VIP dinner. So here is what is going to happen. He leaned down, planting his hands on the arms of my sofa, trapping me in place. His breath smelled heavily of scotch and panic. You have until midnight on Friday to make this right, Elijah dictated, his voice cold and venomous. You are going to call Trey and give him a full groveling apology. Then, you are going to go to your bank and wire your entire $40,000 savings account directly into his fund. Consider it an apology tax for ruining his pitch. I looked up at him, my eyes wide. Elijah, that is my entire life savings. I cannot just give it away. You will give it away if you ever want to wear my ring, he snapped maliciously. You think you can disrespect my family and just walk away clean? You owe us. You wire that money by Friday midnight to help stabilize Trey's fund. If you refuse, the wedding is completely off. You are out of the family. You will be entirely cut off from the elite circle you are so desperately trying to claw your way into. Before I could formulate a response, a sharp, piercing ringtone shattered the tension in the room. Elijah pulled his phone from his pocket. The screen flashed with Vivian's name. He did not step away to take the call. He wanted me to hear this. He pressed the speakerphone button and held the device between us. Vivian's voice screeched through the tiny speaker, sounding frantic and vicious. Tell me you dumped that broke loser. Tell me you left her at that restaurant. I am handling it, Mother, Elijah said. His eyes locked onto mine, daring me to speak. Handling it is not enough, Vivian barked. She is a liability. She is a rat. She deliberately tried to destroy Trey's business because she knows she will never be on our level. Dominique is currently comforting Trey. He is absolutely devastated by this betrayal. You need to cut that girl loose immediately. Do you hear me? I hear you, Elijah replied softly, a cruel smirk touching the corners of his mouth. Besides, Vivian continued, her voice taking on a sickeningly sweet conspiratorial tone. I spoke to Camille's mother tonight after the gala. Camille is officially single again. She was asking about you, Elijah. She was asking if you were really going to throw your life away on some nobody from the suburbs. Do not be an idiot. Dump the trash and call Camille. We need a real woman in this family. Someone with pedigree, someone with actual money. I will call you back, Mother, Elijah said. He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. He stood up straight, adjusting his collar, looking down at me as if I were a stain on the carpet. You hear that, Charmaine? He sneered, his voice dripping with absolute contempt. You are nothing without me. You have exactly until midnight on Friday to prove you are worth my time. Fix this. Hand over the money. Or you can go back to being a nobody for the rest of your miserable, pathetic life. He did not wait for an answer. He turned on his heel, marched to the front door, and walked out into the night. He slammed the door behind him with such tremendous force that the deadbolt rattled in its casing. Silence descended heavily upon the small apartment. I sat on the discount sofa for a long moment, staring at the dent in the drywall. Any normal woman would have collapsed into a puddle of tears. Any normal woman would have been shattered by the realization that her fiancé was entirely willing to extort her life savings just to appease his toxic mother and his fraudulent brother-in-law. But I was not a normal woman, and I did not shed a single tear. I felt a profound, crystal-clear sense of peace. The final test was over. Elijah had proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was utterly devoid of integrity, loyalty, or basic human decency. The surgical removal of this family from my life was no longer just a desire. It was a necessity. I stood up from the sofa. My posture shifted instantly from the cowering, intimidated girlfriend to the ruthless, calculating chief executive officer I truly was. I walked over to the small kitchen counter and opened my sleek, high-powered corporate laptop. The screen illuminated the dark room with a cool blue light. I engaged the encrypted VPN and logged directly into the Z Holdings executive portal. My dashboard loaded instantly, displaying a net worth that would have made Elijah weep. I bypassed the standard menus and opened the Priority Legal Execution tab. My acquisitions manager had uploaded the final stamped deed to Vivian Sterling's Buckhead estate. The property was legally unequivocally mine. I opened the attached eviction draft. It was beautifully worded, citing multiple irresolvable financial defaults and ordering the immediate non-negotiable vacating of the premises by 8 o'clock Monday morning. I did not delegate this task to an assistant. I wanted the satisfaction of doing it myself. I reviewed the document one last time, smiled, and clicked the digital authorization button. The formal foreclosure and eviction notice was officially initiated. It would be hand-delivered by county sheriffs to Vivian's front door at exactly 9 o'clock tomorrow morning. But I was not finished. I opened a second secure window. This one was a direct anonymous submission portal for the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission Joint Fraud Task Force. I attached the high-resolution audio recording I had secretly captured on my phone during Trey's fraudulent pitch at the steakhouse. I attached the fake prospectus he had emailed to the guests. And finally, I attached the certified watermarked deed proving that Z Holdings owned the Peachtree Commercial Plaza, proving conclusively that Trey Jenkins was actively committing massive, multi-million-dollar wire fraud. I filled out the submission form with meticulous detail, ensuring the authorities had everything they needed to secure an immediate federal arrest warrant. I typed out the names of the dangerous private lenders in Miami that Trey owed money to, guaranteeing that the Financial Crimes Unit would act swiftly before the cartel did. I stared at the flashing cursor hovering over the submit button. Elijah had given me an ultimatum. He told me I had until Friday to save his family. I clicked send. The screen confirmed the secure transmission. The Federal Fraud Department now had a perfectly gift-wrapped criminal case. The banking authorities were already processing Vivian's eviction. The dominoes were officially in motion, and there was absolutely nothing the Sterling family could do to stop them. I closed the laptop. I walked into the bedroom, changed into my comfortable silk pajamas, and slipped into bed. I closed my eyes and fell into the deepest, most restful sleep I had experienced in months. I had a deadline to meet. Midnight on Friday was going to be the greatest show of my entire life. The days between the disastrous dinner and Friday night passed in absolute silence. Elijah sent exactly one text message on Thursday morning. It read, "Do not forget, midnight tomorrow. Have the wire transfer receipt in hand or we are done." I simply replied, "I will be ready." He had no idea what kind of readiness I meant. The decoy apartment with its cheap furniture and thin walls was completely emptied by Friday afternoon. I terminated the month-to-month lease and handed the keys back to the landlord. That chapter of my life, the carefully constructed illusion of the struggling, naive administrative assistant, was officially over. I drove my beat-up Honda Civic to a charity donation lot, handed them the signed title, and walked away without looking back. A black town car was waiting for me around the corner, ready to take me back to my actual reality. By 10 o'clock on Friday night, I was standing in the master bathroom of my true residence. The Sovereign was not just a luxury building. It was an elite fortress of extreme wealth towering over the Buckhead skyline. It was the kind of address that required a rigorous financial background check and a board interview just to step foot in the lobby. I stood under the rainfall shower, washing away the last lingering traces of the pathetic persona I had worn for the past year. I stepped out and dried off. I bypassed the plain cotton dresses and the cheap flats I usually wore around him. Instead, I walked into my massive, climate-controlled walk-in closet. I selected a custom, tailored, floor-length emerald silk gown. It clung to my frame, perfectly radiating a quiet, undeniable power. I clasped a simple, flawless diamond tennis bracelet around my wrist. I brushed my hair out, leaving it sleek and sharp. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the woman staring back at me was not a victim. She was an executioner. At 11:30, My phone buzzed on the marble vanity. It was Elijah. "I am leaving the bar now," his text read. "I am coming to your apartment. Have the check ready. I am not in the mood for games." I picked up the phone. "I am not at the apartment," I typed back. "Meet me at this address." I dropped a location pin for the sovereign. "I have everything you want." 3 minutes passed. I could almost see the gears turning in his head. Then his reply came through. "What the hell are you doing at the sovereign? Did you have to borrow the money from some rich boss?" "I do not care. Just be downstairs in the lobby with the paperwork. I am not waiting around." I smiled, tapping the glass screen. "Just give your name to the head concierge. They are expecting you." I walked out of the bedroom and into the sprawling open-concept living area of my penthouse. The entire space was designed to intimidate. It spanned 3 full floors connected by a floating glass staircase. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic, unobstructed view of the glittering Atlanta skyline. The city looked incredibly small beneath me. The floors were imported Italian marble, and the walls were adorned with original contemporary art. I walked over to the massive black marble kitchen island. I pulled out a bottle of Macallan 25-year-old scotch, a bottle that cost $5,000, and set a heavy crystal glass beside it. I picked up an iPad that controlled the smart home features and accessed the lobby security cameras. The live feed popped up on the screen in crisp, high definition. It was 11:45, right on schedule. I watched as Elijah's leased BMW pulled up to the circular driveway of the Sovereign. He honked his horn aggressively at the valet, expecting the immediate fawning service he thought he deserved. The valet, accustomed to dealing with actual billionaires, simply pointed to the visitor parking area across the street. Elijah angrily rolled down his window, clearly shouting, but the valet just crossed his arms and looked away. Furious, Elijah threw the car into gear parked illegally by the curb and stomped toward the grand entrance. He pushed through the heavy revolving doors, stepping into the cavernous, gold-accented lobby. He looked completely out of place. His suit, which he thought was top tier, looked cheap against the backdrop of genuine luxury. He marched directly up to the front desk, bypassing the velvet ropes. "I am here to pick up Charmaine," Elijah demanded, leaning heavily on the mahogany counter. "Tell her Elijah Sterling is here and she needs to hurry up." The head concierge, a stoic former military officer named Vance, did not flinch. He slowly looked Elijah up and down, evaluating the threat level of this loud, aggressive man. He did not recognize the Sterling name, because in circles of true wealth, the Sterlings were absolutely nobody. "May I see some identification?" Sir Vance asked in a flat, unyielding tone. Elijah scoffed, pulling his wallet out and slapping his driver's license onto the counter. "I do not have time for this. She is probably cleaning a unit or running an errand for one of your residents. Just page her." Vance checked the license against the digital guest ledger. He looked up, his expression hardening. "We have an Elijah Sterling cleared for the private penthouse elevator. You are to be escorted immediately." Elijah looked momentarily confused. "Penthouse? What is she doing up there?" "Look, just tell her to come down. I'm not going all the way up." "You misunderstand," Sir Vance said coldly, pressing a button under the desk. "You are not waiting in my lobby." Instantly, 2 massive security guards in tailored black suits materialized from the shadows near the elevator banks. They moved with silent, terrifying precision. They flanked Elijah on both sides, standing so close their shoulders nearly touched his. They did not treat him like an esteemed guest. They treated him like a package that needed to be handled with extreme caution. "Right this way, sir," one of the guards commanded, placing a heavy, unyielding hand on Elijah's back. Elijah tensed, trying to shrug the hand off, but the guard applied just enough pressure to push him forward. "Hey, back off, I know how to walk." Elijah snapped, his voice echoing loudly and drawing irritated glances from a few wealthy residents passing through the lobby. "Do you have any idea who my family is? My mother is Vivian Sterling." The guards did not respond. They simply marched him past the public elevators and down a private, dimly lit corridor that led to a single unmarked brushed steel door. This was the biometric elevator reserved solely for the owner of the penthouse. There were no buttons. The lead guard stepped forward, scanned his retina, and placed his hand on a glass panel. The doors slid open silently. "Step inside," the guard ordered. Elijah hesitated, looking nervously into the wood-paneled interior. "But she is just bringing me a check. Can I just wait down here?" The second guard physically stepped into Elijah's space, forcing him to backpedal into the elevator car. The doors immediately slid shut, cutting off his protests. I watched the security feed switch to the camera inside the elevator box. Elijah was alone now. The false bravado melted away completely. The high-speed elevator shot upwards, moving so fast that Elijah had to grab the brass handrail to steady himself. He looked around the luxurious cabin, his breathing suddenly shallow. He was clearly trying to process what was happening. He still believed I was a broke administrative assistant. He probably assumed I had begged a wealthy employer to use their space for this meeting, or perhaps I had gotten entangled with a high-level loan shark to secure the $40,000. The reality was so far beyond his comprehension that his brain could not even formulate the possibility. The digital floor indicator above the door climbed rapidly. 40, 50, 60. It stopped at 65. The absolute top of the building. I placed the iPad down on the counter. I picked up the heavy crystal decanter. A soft chime echoed through the penthouse. The brushed steel doors directly across from the kitchen island slid open. There was no hallway, no foyer. The elevator opened directly into my living room. Elijah stepped out hesitantly. He took one look at the breathtaking multi-million-dollar space and he completely froze. His eyes widened, sweeping over the 3 stories of glass, the floating staircase, and the sweeping views of the city lights. He looked like a man who had just stepped onto another planet. His jaw was slack. His hands hung loosely at his sides. Then his eyes found me. I was standing in the center of the room, illuminated by the soft glow of a modern chandelier. The emerald silk gown pooled flawlessly at my feet. The diamonds on my wrist caught the light, sparkling with lethal clarity. I did not look like the woman who wore cheap sundresses and served oysters to his rude sister. I looked like exactly what I was, a woman who could buy and sell his entire bloodline before breakfast. I held his gaze perfectly. I did not smile. I did not frown. I simply tilted the crystal decanter and poured a generous measure of the $5,000 scotch into the glass. The rich amber liquid splashed softly against the crystal. The sound was the only thing breaking the suffocating silence in the room. I set the decanter down. I picked up the glass, took a slow, deliberate sip, and let the warmth spread through my chest. "You are exactly on time, Elijah," I said, my voice echoing smoothly across the marble floors. "I appreciate punctuality." Elijah tried to speak. He opened his mouth, but only a pathetic, breathless sound escaped. He took a shaky step forward, his eyes darting frantically around the room, desperately trying to reconcile the broke girl he had been bullying with the billionaire standing in front of him. "Whose house is this, Charmaine?" he finally managed to whisper, his voice trembling violently. "What the hell is going on here?" I set my glass down on the black marble island. I rested my hands on the cool stone, leaning forward just slightly. "I think it is time we had that conversation about how real money works." Elijah did not move. He stood frozen on the imported Italian marble, his eyes darting frantically from the $5,000 bottle of Macallan to the flawless diamonds circling my wrist, and finally to the custom emerald silk gown that draped perfectly across my figure. His brain was visibly misfiring, entirely unable to process the stark, undeniable reality standing right in front of him. He was a man who worshipped wealth, who dedicated his entire existence to the illusion of status, yet he could not recognize a true billionaire when she was sharing his bed. "Whose house is this, Charmaine?" he asked again, his voice cracking, entirely stripped of its usual arrogant bass. "Seriously, are you house-sitting for one of the executives at your tech company? Because if they find out you brought me up here, you are going to get fired. And I am not going to jail for trespassing." I did not laugh. I simply reached under the sleek black marble of the kitchen island. I bypassed the crystal glasses and pulled out a heavy, genuine leather portfolio. I placed it gently on the counter. Then I reached in again, and pulled out the thick draconian prenuptial agreement he and his mother had ambushed me with weeks ago at their disastrous Sunday dinner. I placed my hand flat on the documents and slid them smoothly across the polished stone. They stopped exactly inches from his trembling fingers. "Open it," I commanded, my voice echoing with absolute authority. Elijah hesitated, looking at the black leather folder as if it were a loaded weapon. Slowly, with shaking hands, he reached out and flipped open the cover. The first page was a consolidated banking statement from my primary wealth management account. The bold black numbers at the bottom of the page were impossible to misinterpret. Elijah stared at the page. His eyes widened so far I thought they might burst from his skull. He flipped frantically to the next page. It was the official corporate incorporation document for Z Holdings, listing my full legal name as the sole founder and chief executive officer. The third page was the master property deed for the Sovereign Residential Tower. My name was printed at the very top, granting me absolute ownership of the penthouse and a controlling stake in the entire building. He flipped to the prenuptial agreement. He stared at the signature line on the last page. It was completely, entirely blank. The thermal ink I had used to sign my life away had vanished weeks ago. I watched his chest heave as he struggled to draw breath. "I do not make $40,000 a year, Elijah," I said softly, the words cutting through the silence like a scalpel. "I make $90,000 a month, on a slow month. My company acquires and liquidates commercial assets across the eastern seaboard. I am the sole owner of Z Holdings, and I own this entire building. You did not sneak past security tonight. You were escorted because I instructed my staff to let you up." Elijah dropped the portfolio on the marble counter. It landed with a heavy, definitive thud. "You are Z Holdings," he whispered. His eyes glazed over his mind, trying to rewind the past 12 months of our relationship. "You own the Peachtree Plaza. You are the one Trey was trying to steal from." I nodded slowly, taking another measured sip of my scotch. "I am." For a terrifying 5 seconds, Elijah looked like he was going to vomit. The realization that he had spent the last year patronizing, insulting, and trying to extort one of the wealthiest women in Atlanta was hitting him like a freight train. He realized he had ordered a billionaire to serve oysters to his sister. He realized he had allowed his mother to hand the owner of his building a catering bill. But then something incredibly disturbing happened. The absolute terror in his eyes suddenly melted away. It was replaced by a sickening, manic gleam of unadulterated greed. The sheer magnitude of my wealth completely short-circuited his fragile conscience. He did not care about the lies. He did not care about his mother's cruelty. All he saw was the money. He let out a loud, breathless laugh. It was a chaotic, hysterical sound that bounced off the floor-to-ceiling windows. "You are rich!" Elijah gasped, a massive, greedy smile spreading across his face. "Oh my God, Charmaine, you are actually rich. You have millions." He lunged forward, throwing his arms out to pull me into a celebratory embrace. "We are going to be untouchable," he practically cheered, stepping around the island. "Do you know what we can do with this kind of capital? My mother is going to lose her mind. She is going to beg for your forgiveness. We can buy out Trey's entire firm. We can run this city." I did not flinch. I simply took one graceful, fluid step backward, completely sidestepping his clumsy embrace. He stumbled slightly, his arms grasping at empty air. He looked at me, confused by my coldness. "Baby, what is wrong?" he asked, his smile faltering. "We won. You do not have to hide anymore. We can finally start planning the real wedding. We can invite the entire country club." The sheer audacity of his delusion was almost impressive. He genuinely believed that after treating me like garbage, after issuing ultimatums and demanding my life savings, he could just slide into the role of a billionaire husband. I repeated, letting the word roll off my tongue with absolute disgust. "There is no we, Elijah. There never will be." His smile vanished completely. "But we are engaged. We love each other." "You do not love me," I said, my voice hardening into a weapon. "You do not even know me. You fell in love with a blank canvas that you thought you could control. You wanted a quiet, poor administrative assistant who would look up to you, someone who would be so desperately grateful for your mediocre attention that she would tolerate your toxic, abusive family. I took a step forward, closing the distance between us, forcing him to look directly into my eyes. I dressed in cheap clothes and drove a 12-year-old car because I wanted to see who you really were. I told him, my tone relentless and unforgiving. And you showed me. You are a coward, Elijah. You are a weak, pathetic man hiding behind a leased BMW and fake designer suits. You are so violently insecure that you base your entire self-worth on the approval of a mother who is secretly drowning in debt. Elijah's face flushed with anger and humiliation. Do not talk about my mother like that. I will talk about her however I please, I snapped, my voice rising just enough to command the massive room. Because I own her. You stood in that dining room and watched her humiliate me. You watched Dominique extort me for a $22,000 dress. You watched Trey try to steal my life savings to cover his debts with the Miami cartel. And what did you do? You held the door for them. You helped them build the trap. I am your fiancé, he yelled defensively, his hands balling into fists at his sides. I was just trying to protect our future. I was trying to make sure you fit in. Fit in? I laughed, a harsh, humorless sound. Fit into what? A family of frauds. You mortgaged your own condo yesterday, Elijah. You took out a $100,000 high-interest loan to invest in a Ponzi scheme. You risked the roof over your own head just to impress a room full of strangers. You are entirely bankrupt both financially and morally. Elijah's anger faltered. The reality of his second mortgage, the money he had wired to Trey just hours ago, suddenly crashed down on him. His face went pale. But you can fix that, he stammered, pointing a trembling finger at the leather portfolio on the counter. You have the money. You can pull the strings. You can get my $100,000 back from Trey. You are Z Holdings. I shook my head slowly, looking at him with nothing but pure, unadulterated pity. I am not getting your money back, Elijah. That money is gone, and frankly, it is the exact price you deserve to pay for your stupidity. Elijah stepped back, as if I had physically struck him. His chest heaved. The greedy joy was entirely gone, replaced by a crushing, suffocating panic. He was looking at the total destruction of his life. He was losing his fiancée, his home equity, his social standing, and his entire future in one single night. Charmaine, please, he begged, his voice dropping into a pathetic, desperate whine. I made a mistake. I was blind. My mother pressured me. Trey manipulated me. I swear to God I will cut them off. I will never speak to them again. Just give me another chance. We can leave Atlanta. We can go wherever you want. I love you. He dropped to his knees right there on the cold marble floor. The tailored pants of his cheap suit wrinkled awkwardly. He reached out, trying to grab the hem of my emerald gown. I stepped back again, ensuring his hands grasped nothing but empty air. Get up, Elijah, I said coldly. You are embarrassing yourself. I am not leaving until you forgive me. He sobbed, actual tears spilling down his face, completely destroying his carefully manicured alpha male persona. Please, Charmaine, you cannot just leave me with nothing. I did not answer him. The silence in the penthouse was absolute, broken only by the sound of his pathetic weeping. He knelt there, a broken, defeated fraud, finally understanding the true cost of his arrogance. I stood above him, feeling no triumph, no joy, just the cold satisfaction of a tumor successfully excised from my life. Before Elijah could muster another desperate plea, a sharp, piercing sound shattered the quiet of the room. It was his cell phone. It buzzed violently in his jacket pocket, the harsh ringtone echoing off the glass walls. Elijah ignored it, keeping his tear-streaked face turned up toward me, silently begging for mercy. Answer it, I commanded, my voice flat and completely devoid of emotion. Elijah shook his head frantically. No, I do not care who it is. I am not talking to anyone but you. I stared down at him. I said, Answer your phone, trembling. Elijah slowly reached into his pocket and pulled out the device. He looked at the screen. The caller ID glowed brightly in the dim light. It was Dominique. He accepted the call and put it on speakerphone, his hands shaking so violently he nearly dropped the device on the marble. Before he could even say hello, Dominique's voice exploded through the tiny speaker. She was not using her usual condescending high society drawl. She was screaming. It was a raw, hysterical, blood-curdling shriek of absolute terror. "Elijah, you have to come over here right now." Dominique shrieked, her voice cracking so violently, it sounded like her vocal cords were physically tearing. "They took him. They took everything." Elijah stared at the phone resting on the cold marble floor. He dropped to his hands and knees, hovering over the device, his face completely pale. "Dom, you need to calm down," he stammered, his mind unable to process this new crisis on top of the one he was already living. "Who took him? What are you talking about?" "The FBI, Elijah, the federal agents." Dominique was sobbing so hard, she was hyperventilating, the sound echoing harshly off the glass walls of my penthouse. "They kicked the front door in. I was asleep, and suddenly, there were men in tactical gear swarming the bedroom. There were black SUVs parked all across the lawn. They had weapons, Elijah. They dragged Trey out of bed, threw him face down on the hardwood floor, and put him in handcuffs." Elijah's eyes darted up to meet mine. He looked like a cornered animal. "Why? What did they say he did?" "They said he was running a massive Ponzi scheme," Dominique wailed, the sheer panic in her voice stripping away every ounce of her fabricated high society elegance. "They said his real estate fund was a complete sham. Someone reported him to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Federal Fraud Task Force. They handed over a secret audio recording of his pitch from the steakhouse. But that is not even the worst part. What could possibly be worse than federal agents arresting your husband?" Elijah asked, his voice barely a whisper. "They said he was selling shares to a commercial property he did not legally own," she cried out. "They said the real owner of the Peachtree Plaza provided the certified deed to the authorities. The real owner is pressing federal charges for criminal wire fraud and corporate identity theft. They are suing us for millions, Elijah. Millions of dollars. The agents are currently seizing my jewelry. They are towing my SUV out of the driveway right now. They froze all of our bank accounts. We have absolutely nothing left." Elijah sat back on his heels. His breathing was shallow and erratic. He looked at the phone, then he slowly looked up at me. He remembered the conversation at the steakhouse. He remembered the highly technical question I had asked about the deed and the escrow accounts. The pieces were finally snapping together in his sluggish, arrogant brain, forming a picture so terrifying he could barely look at it. I did not let him speak. I took a deliberate step forward, looking down at the phone on the floor. "Hello, Dominique," I said smoothly, pitching my voice so it carried perfectly into the device's microphone. The line went dead silent, save for the sound of Dominique's ragged breathing. "Charmaine," she asked, her voice trembling with sudden sharp confusion. "What are you doing with my brother? Why are you there?" "I'm just giving him a quick lesson in high-level corporate finance," I replied, my tone icy and relentlessly calm. "I wanted to make sure he understood exactly how real money works, especially since your husband is currently experiencing the legal consequences of stealing it." "What are you talking about?" Dominique demanded, a trace of her old entitled anger flaring up through her panic. "You are just a broke secretary. You do not know anything about Trey's business." I smiled, even though she could not see it. Elijah saw it, and he visibly shrank away from me. "I know everything about his business, Dominique," I corrected her gently. "Because I am the one who sent the FBI to your house tonight. I am the one who sent the audio recording of his fraudulent pitch to the federal task force. And I am the real owner of the Peachtree Commercial Plaza. His Holdings is my company." A sharp, gasping intake of breath came from the speaker. "No," Dominique whispered. "No, that is impossible. You drive a garbage car. You bought your clothes at discount stores. You could not even afford to pay for my wedding dress at the boutique." "I could have bought the entire boutique in cash," Dominique, I stated, enjoying the absolute destruction of her worldview. "I chose not to pay for your dress because I do not subsidize the lifestyles of insolent, entitled women. I let you and your mother believe I was poor because I wanted to see how you treat people you consider beneath you. You showed your true colors. You mocked me. You insulted me and you tried to extort me. And in return, I let your husband dig his own grave on my property. You ruined my life! Dominique screamed, her voice dissolving into fresh hysterical sobs. You malicious, vindictive fraud! You planned this! You set us up! Trey set himself up the moment he decided to run a scam using an asset that belonged to me, I replied coldly. I just expedited his trip to federal prison. Have a pleasant evening, Dominique. I suggest you start looking for a very good public defender. You are going to need one. I tapped my toe against the edge of the phone, signaling Elijah. Hang up, I ordered. Elijah frantically stabbed the screen with his finger, cutting off his sister's wailing. The silence returned to the penthouse, but it was heavier now. It was the crushing weight of total, inescapable ruin. Elijah remained on the floor. He could not stand up. His legs had completely lost the strength to support his body. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and bloodshot, his face shining with a cold sweat. You did this, he whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of awe and absolute terror. You destroyed Trey. You took everything from my sister. I simply defended my corporate assets. I corrected him, taking a slow step around the kitchen island until I was standing directly over him. I did exactly what any high-net-worth individual would do when facing a threat from a common thief. That is the reality of the elite circles you bragged so much about, Elijah. It is not about country clubs and private chefs, it is about power. And you have none. Elijah buried his face in his hands. His shoulders shook violently as the reality of the situation crashed down on his own finances. But what about my money? He choked out, his voice muffled by his fingers. What about the $100,000 I gave him at the dinner? I looked down at him, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for the man who had tried to emotionally blackmail me into handing over my life savings. I want you to think very carefully about that money, Elijah, I said, my voice dropping into a lethal quiet register. I want you to look dead into my eyes while I explain exactly what is going to happen to you. He slowly lowered his hands. His face was a mask of pure agony. He looked up at me, entirely at my mercy. That $100,000 you mortgaged your condo for? I began speaking slowly, so every single word would carve itself into his memory. It is gone. It is gone forever. Trey did not put that money into a verified escrow account. He commingled it with his own fraudulent funds. Best case scenario. The federal government seized it tonight during the raid as proceeds of an illegal criminal enterprise. It will be tied up in litigation and victim restitution funds for the next 10 years. You will never see a single dime of it returned. Elijah let out a low, agonizing groan, but I was not finished. And the worst-case scenario, I continued relentlessly, is that Trey immediately wired your money to the unregulated private lenders in Miami to cover his own massive debts. If that is the case, your home equity is currently sitting in the offshore bank account of a violent cartel. Either way, the bank that issued your second mortgage does not care. They are going to want their monthly payments starting immediately. I cannot make those payments! Elijah sobbed, openly weeping now. The interest rate is too high. My base salary at the sales firm cannot cover both mortgages. I am going to default. Yes, you are, I agreed calmly. You are going to default on the loan. The bank is going to foreclose on your condo. Your credit score will be obliterated. You will be forced to file for personal bankruptcy, which means your corporate employer will likely terminate your position due to their strict financial morality clauses for senior directors. You risked everything you had to impress a room full of strangers and appease your toxic mother. And now you are going to lose your home, your job, and your future. Elijah let out a guttural cry. It was the sound of a man's ego being entirely shattered. He folded in on himself, curling into a tight ball on the cold marble floor. He clutched his head with both hands, pulling at his own hair as he sobbed uncontrollably. The polished, arrogant sales director was gone. He was nothing but a broken, bankrupt shell of a human being, weeping in the penthouse of the woman he had tried to step on. I stood above him, watching his total collapse. I did not feel the need to kick him while he was down. He had done the work for me. He had built his own guillotine and gladly placed his head upon the block. I turned my back on him and walked over to the floor to ceiling windows, looking out over the glittering lights of Atlanta. The city looked peaceful from this height. The drama and the chaos of the Sterling family felt entirely insignificant against the vast sprawling skyline. I took a deep breath, savoring the taste of the expensive scotch and the sweet, flawless victory of complete independence. The trap had sprung flawlessly. The poison had been drawn out. The chapter was over. Or so I thought. Behind me, the silence of the penthouse was pierced by another sound. It was sharp, demanding, and entirely unwelcome. Elijah's phone, still resting on the marble floor near his trembling hands, began to ring again. It was a different ringtone this time, a loud, obnoxious classical piece that cut through the sound of his sobbing. I turned around. Elijah did not move. He just lay there paralyzed by his own ruin, ignoring the glowing screen. I walked back over to the phone and looked down at the caller ID. The screen flashed brightly, illuminating the name in bold black letters. It was Vivian, the architect of all this misery. The woman who had orchestrated the draconian prenuptial agreement demanded the $22,000 dress and ordered Elijah to dump the broke loser. She was calling in the middle of the night, undoubtedly panicked by the news of Trey's arrest and Dominique's hysterical phone calls. She was looking for her golden boy to fix the mess. I smiled. A slow, chilling smile that promised absolute destruction. I had taken down the arrogant brother-in-law. I had broken the spineless fiancé. But the queen of the Sterling family still needed to be dethroned. I leaned down, picked up the ringing phone, and pressed the green button to accept the call. I tapped the speakerphone icon one more time, ready to deliver the final, fatal blow to Vivian Sterling's hollow empire. Elijah Vivian's voice erupted from the speaker the very second the connection was made. She was not speaking with her usual measured, haughty country club drawl. She was screaming, her voice shrill and entirely unhinged, vibrating with a level of panic I had never heard from her before. Elijah, answer me right now. Tell me you are there. Tell me you can hear me. Elijah remained curled on the cold marble floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head violently as if he could physically block out the sound of his mother's hysteria. He did not make a sound. He left the airspace completely open for her to unravel. Elijah, please. Vivian sobbed the sound, wet and ragged. The bank just served me papers. Not a warning, Elijah. Actual legal papers. The county sheriff's deputies just banged on the front door. They parked their cruisers right in the middle of my driveway with their lights flashing. The entire neighborhood saw them. The president of the homeowners association was walking his dog and stood right there on the sidewalk watching the deputies hand me a manila envelope. My reputation is completely destroyed. I leaned against the heavy black marble of the kitchen island, staring down at the glowing phone. I took another slow, deeply satisfying sip of my $5,000 scotch. It is a foreclosure notice. Vivian continued to wail, her breath hitching wildly. They told me my grace period expired at noon today, but that makes no sense. I was negotiating with the senior loan officer. I told them I just needed a little more time, but the deputies said the bank does not own the mortgage anymore. They said a private equity firm bought my debt outright. They bought all 3 of the mortgages, Elijah. They bought everything in a full cash sweep this afternoon, and they are aggressively foreclosing on the house. Elijah let out a soft, pathetic whimper on the floor, but he still refused to speak. He knew exactly what was coming, and he was too much of a coward to intercept the blow for his mother. We have to be out by Monday. Vivian shrieked the reality of her impending homelessness, finally crashing into her fractured ego. 8 o'clock on Monday morning. They are coming to change the locks and drag my furniture out to the curb. Elijah, you need to fix this. You need to call your corporate lawyers right now. You need to leverage your trust fund. You need to talk to Trey. Tell him to pull money from his real estate fund to save my house. We are the Sterling family. We do not get evicted like common trash. Do you hear me? Fix this right now. Her demands echoed through the vast, quiet expanse of my 3-story penthouse. It was the ultimate display of her delusion. Even as her world burned to ash around her, she still believed she possessed power. She still believed her son was a corporate titan and her son-in-law was a real estate mogul. She was completely blind to the fact that she was demanding salvation from two men who were currently drowning in the exact same ocean of ruin. I lowered my crystal glass to the counter. The soft clink of the glass against the stone cut through the heavy silence that followed her outburst. I took a deliberate step closer to the phone. "Hello, Vivian," I said. My voice was calm, perfectly modulated, and absolutely devoid of warmth. It carried the chilling authority of a judge delivering a final verdict. The line went instantly completely silent. I could hear the faint sound of Vivian's ragged breathing abruptly stopping as her brain struggled to process the voice coming through the speaker. Charmaine Vivian finally managed to say, her tone a whiplash transition from desperate hysteria to sharp, venomous confusion. "What are you doing answering my son's phone? Where is Elijah? Put him on the line immediately. We are in the middle of a catastrophic family crisis, and I do not have the time or the patience to deal with your pathetic clinginess tonight." "You are not in a family crisis, Vivian," I corrected her gently, looking down at Elijah, who was now openly weeping into his hands, entirely broken. "You are in a targeted financial liquidation process, and Elijah cannot help you. He is currently lying on the floor of my living room, crying because he just realized his own home is about to be foreclosed on too." "What are you talking about?" Vivian snapped, her voice trembling. "Stop talking nonsense and hand the phone to my son." I knelt down gracefully, my emerald silk gown pooling around me on the flawless Italian marble. I positioned my face just inches from the microphone of the device. I wanted my voice to be the only thing she heard. I wanted every single word to pierce her fabricated reality. "I am talking about your eviction, Vivian," I stated softly. "I am talking about the manila envelope the sheriff's deputies just handed you. I suggest you open it and read the name of the private equity firm that bought your debt." I heard the frantic rustling of heavy paper on the other end of the line. Vivian was tearing into the envelope. There was a long, agonizing pause. I could vividly picture her standing in the grand foyer of her crumbling estate, staring at the legal documents with her perfectly manicured hands shaking violently. "The firm is called Z Holdings," Vivian read aloud, her voice sounding distant and completely hollow. "Yes," I smiled, my eyes locking onto Elijah's terrified face. "The private equity firm is Z Holdings. I am the CEO." Another profound, suffocating silence stretched across the digital connection. "I am the sole founder and owner of the company that just bought your life." I continued, my voice steady and relentless. "You spent the last year treating me like a disease. You mocked my clothes. You mocked my car. You dragged me to a bridal boutique and tried to publicly humiliate me into paying $22,000 for Dominique's dress. You told your son I was a broke loser who was poisoning your precious family legacy. You believed your own lies so deeply that you never bothered to wonder why a woman with my absolute composure would tolerate your blatant disrespect." "No," Vivian whispered, the sound barely audible over the phone. "No, that is not possible. You are a secretary. You are nothing. I am the woman who authorized the immediate foreclosure of your property," I replied smoothly. "Do you remember the Sunday dinner, Vivian? Do you remember the stained catering apron Dominique shoved into my chest? You told me my place was in the kitchen. You wanted me to be your maid." Vivian began to hyperventilate. Her breaths came in short, panicked gasps. "Perfect," I whispered into the microphone, delivering the final fatal checkmate. "Make sure the floors are scrubbed before my contractors arrive on Monday to demolish your house." "What?" Vivian shrieked, a raw, primal sound of absolute devastation. "Demolish. You cannot tear down my house. This is a legacy estate. We are the Sterling family. You cannot do this to me." "I am not doing anything to you, Vivian. I am simply clearing a distressed, toxic liability off my newly acquired plot of land. Your peeling columns and tacky chandeliers are going straight into a landfill to make room for a modern commercial development. Your legacy is officially over. Enjoy packing your bags. I strongly suggest you try to find a moving company that accepts expired credit cards." "Charmaine, please." Vivian suddenly sobbed, her arrogance completely fracturing, leaving nothing but a desperate, terrified old woman begging for her life. "Please, I am sorry. I was wrong about you. I will apologize publicly. I will welcome you into the family. Just please do not take my home. Do not leave me on the street. You should have thought about the street before you handed me that prenuptial agreement, I said coldly. Goodbye, Vivian. I reached out and tapped the red icon on the screen. The line went dead. The abrupt silence in the penthouse was magnificent. The reign of Vivian Sterling was completely extinguished with a single touch of my finger. I picked up the phone, stood back up, and tossed the device onto the kitchen island next to my leather portfolio. I looked down at Elijah. He was still curled in a pathetic ball on the marble floor. He had listened to the entire exchange. He had heard his mother beg and cry, and he had done absolutely nothing to stop it. The realization of my total, uncompromising ruthlessness had finally penetrated his thick skull. Charmaine Elijah whimpered slowly, uncurling his body and looking up at me with red, swollen eyes. You have to believe me. It was all her. She made me do those things. She made me give you that contract. She made me pressure you about the money for Trey. She controls everything. I was just trying to keep the peace. I am a victim too. I stared at him, feeling a wave of absolute revulsion. Even now, facing total destruction, he refused to take accountability. He was willing to throw his own mother to the wolves if it meant saving his own skin. He was truly the most spineless creature I had ever encountered. You are a grown man, Elijah, I said, my voice dripping with disgust. You made your choices. You chose to protect a lie instead of protecting your fiancé. You chose to invest in a fraud instead of investing in reality. You are not a victim. You are just a fool who finally ran out of luck. I turned away from him and picked up the smart home control panel resting on the counter. I tapped the security application, opening a direct communication channel to the head concierge desk in the lobby. Vance, I said clearly into the device. Yes, Ms. Charmaine. The stoic voice of the former military officer replied instantly through the intercom system. I require a security detail at the penthouse immediately, I ordered, keeping my eyes fixed on the panoramic view of the city. Understood. They are already in the dedicated elevator. Less than 10 seconds later, the soft chime of the biometric elevator echoed through the living room. The brushed steel doors slid open. The exact same two massive men in tailored black suits stepped out onto the marble floor. They did not look around. They did not ask questions. Their eyes instantly locked onto the weeping, pathetic mess of a man lying on my floor. Elijah scrambled backward, his expensive leather shoes slipping uselessly against the polished stone. Wait, please, he begged, holding his hands up defensively. Charmaine, you cannot just throw me out. I have nowhere to go. My condo is mortgaged. My bank accounts are tied up in Trey's fund. I do not even have money for a hotel. Please just let me stay the night. Just let me sleep on the couch. I looked at him over my shoulder. My expression was carved from ice. Escort this man out of my building. I signaled to my private security, my voice ringing with finality. He is trespassing. The two guards moved with terrifying efficiency. They crossed the room in 3 massive strides. Each guard grabbed one of Elijah's arms, hoisting him off the floor with effortless strength. Elijah struggled weakly, kicking his legs, but the guards' grips were like iron vices. They dragged him backward toward the open elevator doors. Charmaine, please! Elijah screamed, his voice echoing frantically in the large space. I love you. I am sorry. Please do not do this to me. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I picked up my crystal glass from the marble island and turned my back on him completely. The guards dragged him into the elevator cabin. The brushed steel doors slid shut instantly, cutting off his pathetic wailing cries. The penthouse fell back into perfect, absolute silence. I stood alone in the center of my empire, the city lights reflecting off the flawless diamonds on my wrist. The Sterling family was gone. Their toxic influence, their fake wealth, and their cruel arrogance had been entirely eradicated from my life. I took a slow, deep breath, tasting the rich scotch and the incredibly sweet air of absolute freedom. 3 months passed since that night. The humid Atlanta summer slowly faded into a crisp, cool autumn. The dust from the catastrophic collapse of the Sterling family had finally settled, leaving a landscape completely altered by the sheer force of financial gravity. I did not have to lift a single finger to finish them off. I simply watched from the comfort of my penthouse as the dominoes I had tipped over completed their destructive path. The federal justice system moves remarkably fast when millions of dollars and angry wealthy investors are involved. Trey's high-profile trial did not even make it to a jury. Faced with overwhelming evidence including the high-resolution audio recording I provided and the undeniable proof of my corporate deed, his public defender begged him to take a plea deal. He was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and money laundering. The flashy, arrogant real estate mogul who used to boast about his crypto portfolios and wear pastel linen suits is now entirely stripped of his identity. He wears a standardized, scratchy orange federal jumpsuit. He sleeps on a thin mattress in a medium security cell, terrified every single day that the Miami cartel lenders he stole from might have connections on the inside. Dominique's descent into poverty was swift and absolute. The federal government seized every single asset tied to Trey's name to pay off the victim restitution fund. They took the leased luxury SUVs, they took the house, they took her diamond necklaces, and they even seized the funds in her checking account. The pampered princess of the Sterling family, who had never worked a day in her life, found herself entirely destitute. Without her mother's wealth or her husband's stolen money to support her, Dominique was forced to enter the workforce. She now works at a massive fluorescent-lit discount retail warehouse on the outskirts of the city. She spends 10 hours a day on her feet, wearing an unflattering polyester uniform, folding clearance clothing, and dealing with rude customers. The supreme irony is that she was assigned to the bridal department. Every day, with blistered feet and a broken ego, she has to carry cheap synthetic wedding gowns back to the racks, forever haunted by the memory of the $22,000 custom silk masterpiece she arrogantly demanded I pay for. Vivian's downfall was perhaps the most poetic. The eviction was executed exactly at 8 o'clock on that fateful Monday morning. My corporate attorneys coordinated with the county sheriffs to ensure the process was strictly by the book. The deputies stood on the manicured lawn while a team of fast-paced contractors dragged Vivian's heavy, outdated mahogany furniture out of the house and deposited it unceremoniously onto the public curb. Vivian stood on the sidewalk in her silk bathrobe, weeping and screaming at the neighbors who drove by. But her wealthy country club friends did not stop to help. They rolled up their tinted windows and looked the other way. High society does not tolerate the stench of poverty. Vivian now lives in a cramped one-bedroom apartment in a heavily industrialized, noisy neighborhood far away from the elite circles of Buckhead. The walls are paper-thin. The hallways smell of stale cooking oil and cheap bleach. She spends her days sitting on a discount sofa, frantically calling her former socialite friends, only to be sent straight to voicemail every single time. She has been completely erased from the world she worshipped. And then there was Elijah, my former fiancé. The man who was willing to trade my dignity and my life savings for a seat at his mother's toxic table. His financial ruin was a textbook case of arrogant stupidity. Once the second mortgage on his condo defaulted, the bank moved in aggressively. They seized the property, obliterating his credit score and forcing him to file for Chapter 7 personal bankruptcy. The moment the bankruptcy filing hit the public records, his corporate employer immediately triggered the morality and financial responsibility clauses in his executive contract. He was escorted out of his office by security carrying his belongings in a small cardboard box, desperate, terrified, and completely broke. Elijah tried to crawl back to Camille, the wealthy surgeon's daughter his mother had desperately wanted him to marry. He showed up at her gated community, begging for a second chance. Camille did not even let him pass the security checkpoint. She laughed at him through the intercom system and threatened to call the police if he ever returned. Elijah is now renting a dingy, weekly motel room by the highway. He is completely single, entirely bankrupt, and forced to look at his own miserable reflection in a stained mirror every morning, knowing he threw away a billionaire who actually loved him for the sake of his fragile ego. It was a bright Tuesday morning when I finally decided to visit the site of my latest real estate acquisition. I stepped out of the private elevator of the Sovereign wearing a razor-sharp tailored designer suit that commanded absolute respect. I walked into the secure underground garage and climbed into the driver's seat of my brand new matte black Mercedes G-Wagon. It was a massive, imposing vehicle, a rolling fortress of luxury and power. A far cry from the 12-year-old Honda Civic I used to drive when I was testing Elijah's character. I drove smoothly through the affluent streets of Atlanta, the heavy engine purring like a caged panther. I turned onto the familiar tree-lined avenue in Buckhead, where the Sterling estate used to stand. I pulled the G-Wagon over to the curb, put the vehicle in park, and rolled down the tinted window. The air smelled of diesel fuel, pulverized stone, and progress. A massive heavy-duty yellow bulldozer was currently driving its steel treads directly over the spot where the grand foyer used to be. The peeling columns were completely gone, reduced to splintered kindling and white dust. The extravagant patio where Dominique had shoved that stained catering apron into my chest was being systematically crushed into gravel. The lavish dining room where Vivian had tried to force me to sign away my legal rights was now nothing but a gaping crater in the earth. My construction foreman, wearing a bright orange vest and a hard hat, walked over to my vehicle. He leaned down, handing me the finalized stamped blueprints for the new luxury commercial development that would soon rise from the ashes of the Sterling legacy. "Everything is right on schedule," Ms. Charmaine, the foreman, shouted over the roar of the heavy machinery. "We will have the foundation poured by the end of the month." "Excellent work," I replied, my voice steady and content. "Keep to the timeline." I rolled the window back up, sealing myself inside the quiet, climate-controlled cabin of my vehicle. I watched the bulldozer tear down the final standing wall of the master bedroom. Justice had been served flawlessly. There were no screaming matches. There was no physical violence. There was no petty emotional revenge. It was pure lethal financial strategy. I had surgically removed a toxic cancer from my life, and I was literally building an empire on the empty space it left behind. The Sterling family thought they could break me, but all they did was hand me the deed to their own destruction. I put the G-Wagon in drive and pulled away from the curb, leaving the noise and the wreckage in my rearview mirror. They say you should dress for the job you want. I dressed for the truth I wanted to expose. When you build your own empire, you do not need a seat at someone else's toxic table. You buy the whole damn restaurant. You do not have to shrink yourself to fit into rooms that were never meant for you. You have the power to walk away, to observe, and to strike when the moment is perfectly aligned. Have you ever had to play the fool to catch the villain? Have you ever had to hide your strength just to see who was actually in your corner? Let me know your stories in the comments below. If this journey resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more stories of resilient strategy and ultimate vindication. Thank you for walking this path with me, and always remember, the silent observer is usually the one holding all the cards. Stay strong, build your empire, and never let anyone dictate your worth. The greatest lesson from this journey is that true power never needs to scream for attention. We often feel pressured to prove our worth to toxic people, bending backward to fit into rooms where we are entirely disrespected. But shrinking yourself to appease someone else's fragile ego is always a losing game. When you strip away the designer labels and the illusion of status, you force people to reveal their true character. Let them underestimate you. Let them believe they hold all the cards. Because when you quietly build your own empire, you secure both your freedom and your peace. If you have ever had to walk away from a toxic environment to protect your worth, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share your story in the comments below.